Kia ora everyone, let's begin our Council meeting, 22nd of July 2020. Council affirmation. Let us affirm today that we as councillors will work to serve the citizens of Selwyn District, to always use our gifts of understanding, courage, common sense, wisdom and integrity in our discussions, dealings and decisions so that we may solve problems effectively. May we always recognise each other's values and opinions, be fair-minded and ready to listen to each other's point of view. In our dealings with each other, let us always be open to the truth of others, ready to seek agreement, slow to take offence, and always prepared to forgive. May we always work to enhance the well-being of Selwyn District and its communities. And karakia whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kiuta, kia mā taratara ki tai, he hi aki ana te atukura, he hio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei, mauri ora. Grab seat. Yes, welcome along to any guests that are with us today, and if you're joining us online, hello. Apologies, I don't think that we're all present, so there are no apologies that I've received for today. Identification of any extraordinary general business, I haven't been made aware of any. Conflicts of interest outside of our standard conflicts, there are none identified now, and there's no public forum today. So we've got a confirmation of minutes. The first lot's on pages 14 through 15, and it's of the Selwyn District Council ordinary meeting held on the 24th of June. Is there a mover and a seconder? Alexander and McInnes. Any discussion on those minutes? All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. And then the item number 2 is a confirmation of the minutes from the 1st of July. These are the unconfirmed minutes from that meeting. You would like to move that? Great, Councillor Lemon, and seconded Councillor Mugford. Any discussion on those minutes? All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. On our action list, we have a number of items including solar panels on indoor courts, placement of insurance, EV charging sites, coronation report for Arthur's Pass, Upper Selwyn Huts, Glen Tunnel drainage and Arthur's Pass stormwater. Some of them are on our agenda today and others take us through till the 9th of September. First report is an update from me, and probably the one thing that's worth sharing is the rural and provincial sector meeting that was held in Wellington on Thursday and Friday last week. It was the first time we've got together with those other rural and provincial councils post-COVID, and so it was good to be in the room and be a part of the discussions. I attended with the Deputy Mayor and our CE. The focus of the meeting was on recovery, the effects of COVID, and then dominated a lot by the water discussion and where DIA is pushing on their contribution to water, but also on gathering councils' regions, and they're particularly focused on multi-region approach to Three Waters infrastructure and its control management. Pricing, charging, all things involved in that space. It seems to be a focus particularly on fresh water to begin with, but wastewater is clearly a part of the discussions too, and stormwater to a slightly lesser extent. And stormwater has a few grey areas around it because where does land drainage sit, where does treatment of stormwater sit, and those things, but drinking water and wastewater are certainly the two that were there. So we had an introduction from the President. So Dave Cull is standing down as President at the AGM, which is to happen next month. Dave's been the President of LGNZ for 6 years, I want to say, David? Yeah. 2 terms, and has done a good job for us. He is leaving, and there'll be an election at the AGM for the President's seat. 2 members have put their names forward, Stuart Crosby, who is on the Regional Council for Bay of Plenty, and Alex Walker, who's the Mayor of Central Hawke's Bay. There's also been 2 nominations for Deputy President. They are Gary Kircher, who's the Mayor of Waitaki District, and Hamish McDowell, who's the Mayor of Whanganui District. So, we're going to have a new President and Deputy President following the AGM. There was also Malcolm Alexander has been our CE for, I think, 9 years was talked about, and he's done a really good job at transforming local government, the way that we work together, but particularly how we face outwards and connect with the government. and connect with our stakeholders. And yeah, there were a number of stories shared about the good work that Malcolm Alexander has done. There's going to be an interim period of about a month before the new CE begins her role, and one of Malcolm's deputies is stepping up in an acting role for that month. Lawrence Yule spoke, and he is a previous president of Local Government New Zealand, but is currently a National Party member in for the Hawke's Bay area, and he spoke of some of the things that the National Party was keen to see as far as their connection with local government, and from his point of view, he's obviously got a history and a heart for the space that we operate in, and so was keen to ensure that that was brought forward not just in a Wellington for New Zealand type model, but a Wellington understanding the local delivery. We had a number of other presenters, and I'll circulate the notes to you and the slides that were presented there. I think the most interesting speaker was the Minister for Internal Affairs, and where is her?
Tracy Martin started day 2.
Tracy Martin.
So I think she was.
Anyway, she was very interesting. Oh, libraries. Yeah. She covers a wide range of areas and topics, and she particularly spoke around libraries, the funding that's been made available for libraries for training, and the important space that libraries play in our community, not just for the books that they hold, but as a gathering space, as a place for people to further their own education. And there was a commitment there to see that libraries continue to work well for all of us. And so on. It's been great in the last week to be able to have Tennyson Street open, and for us to be able to drive down and get close to Te Ara Atia being built in Tennyson Street, and to see the size and scale of what that building is and what it represents for our community as a space where Rolleston, but also the Waitasauan district, can continue to learn, to advance their learning, but together and be with others in our community. So I'll circulate the notes from that meeting, and also the slides if anyone's interested, and happy to take any questions on that. David and Malcolm are also present. Malcolm, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, some very interesting presenters. Lawrence Yule fired a shot as he finished his conversation, saying that in the future he would like to see building consents done by independent firms that were outside of councils. But it might speed it up. We sort of left us in the lurch. So if that's the policy that's coming forward out of the opposition, I'm not happy with it one little bit. Tracy Martin was very interesting in her comments about libraries and the funding of libraries. What has become very apparent during COVID is that those who can't afford internet connections go to the library to get internet connections and access, and that a lot of people in COVID are unfortunately out of jobs, and librarians are there to help. They're helping people put CVs together and getting people back into the workforce, and she sees that as a great linkage in what libraries, the new work that libraries does, and hence the funding from central government to help a local government achieve that, to help our communities in this time of need of unemployment with COVID.
And just to finish, the water discussion did dominate a lot of the presentations. So DIA has put out an MOU to ask councils to opt in to an MOU where there'll be mutual understanding around sharing of information, going in with an open mind, but understanding that the status quo is not going to be an acceptable outcome at the end. And along with that comes about $750 million worth of funding into the local government space. I think 50 million of that has been tagged to the new regulator, which leaves about 700 million left over to be shared on a population basis, is what they were talking around the rest of New Zealand. Tuesday next week, so they're conducting a roadshow right through the country, and Tuesday next week is the time in Christchurch. There'll be a lot of councils attending that, and I hope that we all attend. I know that many of you have already responded to Bernadette that you will be there. If you haven't done that, can you please, and you do intend to come, can you please let Bernadette know? I just encourage you to do that. It's going to mean that we're not double-handed information, and it gives you the best footing to be able to make a decision for us as a council as we determine whether or not we would sign up to that tranche one. The tranche one funding is basically about an open conversation and the sharing of information that we have. The bigger decisions are going to be around tranche 2, 3, and whatever needs to happen over the next 18 months to 2 years. The position of local government, New Zealand, and our members that have been on the working group with DIA, including members from Solgum, has been that we're open to amalgamations of water supplies and water entities, but it shouldn't be mandatory. It needs to be voluntary done. And at the moment, our staff, David, engineers from across the top of the South Island are working on what this might mean for us, so that we can actually have some good data and good information before we would make any decision about where we go. So yeah, that decision is going to be for us as Selwyn, as it will be Ashburton for Ashburton, Waimakere for Waimakere, and Christchurch for Christchurch. We intend, so that's on Tuesday next week. On Wednesday, there'll be a bit of a debrief, and on Friday there's some discussion with the mayors and CEs from the top of the South Island, so Canterbury West Coast, Nelson, Marlborough, Tasman, just to understand, did we all hear the same message in all the different workshops that were shared, and is there anything missing or any new information we need to give to our engineers as they come back with what this might look like. Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just going to say at the end of the meeting, we might want to check our travel arrangements for next Tuesday so we can coordinate and cooperate and minimise vehicle travel on the day.
Consider it under control. Yep, that is on our list.
Right. And I'd also say that we'll be taking 3, 4, 5 other staff members with us. I think it's important that we have as wider exposure to this work as possible, so our staff will be attending too.
Yeah, and look, it is important, and just the comments that I would add. Firstly, the government money is a grant; it's not a loan, and it must be spent before the 30th of June 2021. Further, it can be used for both OPEX and CAPEX. So when we get together as a group on the 29th, I think it is, not only will we be reflecting on what we heard on the 28th, but we'll also be hearing from the two Murrays in terms of the amount that we hope will be allocated to us. This is actually what we're going to spend it on.
Great. I'll move that you receive my report. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lyle. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Item number 2, pages 62 to 69, Chief Executive's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Take the majority of the report as being read, albeit for the benefit of those who are live streaming. I'll just read some pertinent aspects of some of the items. The first one is a funding application to Rata Foundation for the sum of $200,000 for the cost of equipment that's going to be put into the indoor facility in Foster Park. That is recommendation B, and Mr. Reid is with us and can answer any questions that anybody may have on that, but I would encourage council to approve that recommendation. Second item on the agenda is a note around celebrating Selwyn's COVID-19 heroes, which is getting a lot of publicity at the moment, being led by the Mayor. And there's a selection panel, the Mayor, Liz Brown from Taumotu, and Selwyn Times editor Barry Clark, who are selecting recipients of those awards. The next item is a really good news story, and it's around the continued heavy demand that we are receiving for building consents. Council was receiving an average of around 220 building consents a month prior to the lockdown. It's rapidly increased. Council receiving 258 applications in May, and for us a brand new all-time record of 290 in June. So that's up from the average. Our consenting team has also gone from carrying out an average of 1,400 building inspections a month, or around 70 inspections a day, to almost 1,600 inspections in May and over 1,800 in June. So phenomenal the way those numbers are continuing to escalate upwards, clearly putting pressure on us administratively in terms of processing, although we're still processing within the 20-day time frame. There is some natural slippage, and you would expect that to be the case. Next item is just drawing everybody's attention to the new dog park, which has been opened up in Darfield, but acknowledging that McHugh's will remain as an on-leash area for dogs, for people in that area. And there are, Mr. Mayor, on bottom of page 64, 65 through 69, some suggested changes to the delegations manual, just acknowledging there is an error at the bottom of page 64. Jessie Burgess is still listed, of course. Jessie is now a staff member of ECAN. So with that alteration, recommendations stand, but happy to answer any questions, Mr. Mayor.
That's okay to move.
Firstly, around the dog park, that's great news. What I'm seeing, particularly in my ward as well, is increasing demand for dog parks right throughout the district, to be honest. With increasing urbanisation, people want places they can safely put their dog off lead. And I just want to signal, I guess that's a growing area where perhaps in our new developments, rather than having reserves gifted by developers, maybe we need to look at them asking them to put dog parks in as part of their offer, because slides and seesaws aren't perhaps what the community want. They want places to run their dogs and things like that. So we talked about the delegations manual. I just want to query with the Chief Executive, there's a new delegation for, I think it's the Health and Safety Officer of 10,000, which seems to be out of line with all the other delegations, which up to about 5,000. Is there a reason why there seems to be such a high delegation?
Sorry,
Page 68, People, Culture and Capability, Health, Safety, Wellbeing Manager, Delegated Approval, $10,000, a new authority. Seems quite high when you consider the Aquatic Services Manager's got 5,000. I would have thought a bigger portfolio.
Sorry, that's a new position to the organisation, and given where that sits within our grid chart and also the reporting lines, I'm comfortable that 10 is appropriate because we're looking to that person to implement some new initiatives across the organisation, Grant.
No, I just wanted to get the rationale behind it. It seemed out of step with the other delegations.
Any further questions for David? It's been moved and seconded with the change of removal of Jessie Burgess's name. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Declare it carried. Item number 3 is on pages 70 through 109. It's financial report to the 31st of May 2020. Does someone want to move that we receive that? Councillor Lemon. And seconded. Councillor Epiha. Is there any discussion on that? And Carl, is there anything? I've got Carl's name here beside. Craig's here. Any questions that councillors have? Councillor Alexander.
Yeah, I did on the page 71 look some askance at the payments to suppliers being so far over budget, and then went through the various categories of reporting and now quite comfortable with it. But it would be helpful if there was actually a notation in the notes on that page as to why that was so far away from budget. It's $2.5 million. It would have been helpful to have a notation on page 71 explaining sort of the around that. It's a significant item.
So, yeah, note that comment. Thank you very much, and we'll address that next time around. The other thing, just for the information of councillors, and in conversation with the Chair of Audit and Risk earlier this week, we are looking to review the format of our reports, particularly looking at exception reporting and also on non-financial drivers. Just as a refresh, I think the content of these reports has been really good. I think it's served its purpose, and it's time to move to the next step.
Yeah, it's really just to follow up to the Chief Executive's comments here. That is the intention for the current, it is now the current financial year, that we'll review these reports, and perhaps the format will be slightly altered and the content will be slightly altered, and perhaps reflect a changing focus for us as an Audit and Risk Committee. In light of Mark's question too, it might be timely that perhaps the questions that we ask as an Audit and Risk Committee sometimes are mirrored by this committee, and that maybe we can capture those somehow in this report, so that they're coming a couple of weeks later and we may be able to capture some of those questions have already perhaps been asked. So I'm not quite sure how we achieve that, but that's a conversation for us to have.
And Murray, I should have asked earlier, but Annalise Elstrop, independent member, was at the her first meeting of the Audit and Risk Committee, and probably when we were doing the minutes, I should have just asked you if there were any comments you had around that, but it was value added in the first meeting.
Yeah, very much value added. Look, for the first meeting attended, she raised some very good points, and perhaps not so much in the meeting itself, but definitely the relationship that she's already starting to build with us as committee, but also with key staff. She's made the point of coming in here on at least one occasion, David, maybe more, and starting to build those relationships with staff and get an understanding of how we operate. So really comfortable with where she sits in the process and the type of personality that she is, and the ability, I think, for us to have a really good, strong and professional working relationship.
Yeah, just much further on in the report, page 101, the average processing days for building consents. The Chief Executive had mentioned our record numbers of residential building consents, but I also note we were out to almost 18 days processing time. Just assurance from Mr. Harris as to how we're managing that challenge of those record numbers.
Thank you, and through the chair. We're managing the numbers by using contractors currently, and we have also Christchurch City Council building inspectors, 2 of them operating 5 days a week to assist us with the workload. So that's how we're filling the gap right now. Interesting enough, the contractors are and the consultants are also quite busy, and the South Island, particularly apart from perhaps Queenstown, is holding its pre-COVID workloads quite firmly at the moment. So just have to wait and see. Reluctant to try and take on more staff at this point, financial reasons, and also the concern about a potential drop after the elections in terms of work volume. So it's just a wait and see approach. But currently, in terms of the 30% drop that we predicted through the annual plan process, we've probably had a 5% to 10% increase, but managing through consultants. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. It's been moved and seconded, this report. All those in favour say aye. Against? It carries. Item 4 is on pages 110 through 144, and it's the assumptions and uncertainties for the 2021-2031 long-term plan and activity management plans. And Carl and Murray Washington will come to the front of the room. Oh, sorry, Craig.
The plan is I'll just do a brief introduction to the report, then we'll just go around and see if there's any questions. So the purpose of this report you have in front of you is to identify the high-level assumptions that will underpin the development of the 2021-31 long-term plan, including the activity management plans and the 30-year infrastructure strategy. The potential for social and economic disruption from COVID-19 is the sort of key underlying question that we've been thinking about when we're developing our plans going forward. This doesn't mean that other issues such as climate change are no longer important. It's just that there's higher risk and uncertainty, and that will play a significant role in this long-term plan, more so even than other long-term plans. We've always had to include some key assumptions based on the best information available at the time to allow us to develop our planning documents, for our planning documents to proceed. These assumptions have been updated to take into account the current environment that we're operating in and also the degree of uncertainty. The assumptions have been reviewed through the long-term plan project group, which is an interdepartmental group across the whole council. The report includes the key assumptions and tables, and also up front in the report, the sort of the more important assumptions that we see. These include the growth assumption. So we expect population change to be around 90,000 population by the end of the 10-year plan. There'll be no major adverse events. This sort of assumption is not quite relevant anymore in terms of there won't be an event. It's more around the impact of the event. So our assumption in preparing the plans is there'll be no significant impact from the event, any event that occurs. There's also the water reform. So even drafting this report, there's been change since we've drafted this report a couple of weeks ago. And the timing of capital expenditure, when capital expenditure occur, we're assuming that it'll occur when we plan. Climate change, the underlying assumption is that climate change is happening, but there'll be a low to minor impact on the council over the period covered by the long-term plan. just thought I'd just go through sort of the assumptions that have been tweaked slightly since the 2018-28 long-term plan. So there's been some minor wording changes as well as some of the assumptions removed that are no longer relevant. We've adjusted borrowing costs. So in the current environment, borrowing costs have reduced to approximately 2.5% over the long-term plan timeframe, compared to 4 to 6% in our previous long-term plan. This is consistent with sort of market rates. We're sort of borrowing under 1% at the moment, but over the long term, the 10-year, we expect the average to work at about 2.5%. NZTA revenue is also more uncertain than it's ever been, so we've increased the uncertainty there to a moderate risk as opposed to a low risk in previous long-term plans. The return on cash investments has reduced to 1.5%. Previously, we had 3.5% within that, so sensible sort of return over the 10-year plan. As I said earlier, there's no major financial impact or no major impact from a major event, including COVID, and inflation forecasts will be updated in September once we receive the inflation numbers from BERL. So I'm happy to take any questions, or we're happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Craig. And yeah, it is a good document to think about where we're starting and what we're assuming going forward. And there has to be a lot of assumptions made because no one's been particularly successful at predicting the future. Just thinking, what does today we say yes to this set of assumptions? What does that lock us into as far as the LTP process is the next 12 months of different projects and yeses and nos on many different levels? What does saying yes to this today set us down the path of?
So these are like the key assumptions that we have the best information at the moment. So if we adopt these at the moment, we can then tweak them as we go on, as more information comes to light or better information comes to light. But it just allows the activity managers to progress with developing their activity management plans and also the long-term plan. So that's why we need that certainty now. So
And there will be fluidity throughout this process for all of the reasons that Craig's alluded to, but this gives us the base to start our discussions probably over the next couple or 3 months.
Thank you. Look, I know that we've had a discussion with regards to reforming the land drainage structure, and that is a major restructuring process. The last time it was basically undertaken across the whole district was 1960, and times have changed since then. I'm just conscious of the fact that I don't think, I may stand to be incorrect, but I don't think land drainage is covered under the Three Waters. So if it's not, then that restructuring would need to actually be considered within the context of this particular process. So I'm just highlighting that issue coming forward because it has major implications for asset management plans. It's not a small issue, it's actually a big issue. So I'm just highlighting that one. Thank you.
Just to add to that, yes, you are correct. Land drainage doesn't appear to fall under the Three Waters. As you know, we have a 5-water portfolio, and as the Mayor has mentioned, it's likely to focus is going to be on water and wastewater, and stormwater may be in the two hard basket initially. There's a number of issues we need to talk to ECAT about around responsibility around finished water. That includes land drainage, that includes water races, that includes river engineering and the rating districts. We're having those discussions, and if we get to a certain point, both parties would need to start including those conversations in our respective long-term plans. The Mayor's already indicated we will be looking at water races in quite detail over the next year.
And Deborah, those items are on our agenda for our meeting with ECAN next Wednesday afternoon.
Thank you. My questions, concerns, comments are on page 124 under transportation. Firstly, we refer to walking and cycling. I wonder if we need to broaden that now we have a report later on our agenda about accepting the scooter companies in our district, that we actually need it to be called walking, cycling and active modes of transportation, because it's now going to be more than just walking and cycling. Under risks, I think there's two risks that aren't identified. The first is that public transport is funded by the regional council, and we have only a limited ability to influence and alter their long-term plan. We can have all the desires we want around public transport, but if they go in a different direction in their long-term plan, then it means it provides a great deal of risk. Similarly, the regional transport plan, which sets the transportation priorities, is also, we have input into it, but it is outside our direct control. And finally, the same goes with NZTA funding. If we were to receive a much reduced FAR rate, that would dramatically impact our transportation programs. So those are three risks. We're reliant on external project planning and funding that aren't listed as risks. If they were to reduce the amount of funding that comes into our district, that would have a commensurate impact on either our rates or the amount of road transportation projects we would be able to do.
Yes, and you're correct on all of those. And as you're aware, and as commented through the assumptions report, the current NZTA funding model is under pressure. More efficient vehicles, less road use, more electric vehicles, more walking and cycling, and again, public transport all have an effect. Unfortunately, as you're probably aware, we'll get an indication of the NLTP before we sign off on the long-term plan, but it likely won't be confirmed until September 2021. The FAR rate, I understand, will be signalled in the next several months. That will some way be dependent on how NZTA are looking at their whole funding. But they are risks, and they are considerable risks.
And through the period of our long-term plan, the whole central government election cycle, we've seen the government priority statement change at the last election, which significantly impacted transportation projects. So those are just risks that I think we should acknowledge in our long-term plan. They're risks we can't manage, but they are actually risks we should acknowledge.
Yes, and at this stage, we haven't seen the final GPS.
Thank you, Councillor Lemon.
Yeah, Craig, it's really just a process thing, I guess. And I note your comment here on page 130 of the bill forecast. I'm assuming that table is redacted, so that's why we've got no figures here. There would have been originally figures.
It's just a placeholder really, so it's just
Right, so
because
there weren't actually any figures supplied.
There will be once we get the figures.
But there weren't, is what I'm saying.
No,
So,
there weren't. No.
yeah, that's fine. So just I guess, yeah, it goes to the process question is when that comes through in September, will that come through to one of our workshops? I guess it's, yeah, rather than any other forum. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Just another question it's on page 126. It's at the very bottom. It gets to why I was asking about change over the coming months. It's around water reform. It's the bottom box. And our current assumption there is it is assumed that council's water activity will not be amalgamated into another body. To me, that seems far less likely than at least council's drinking water and wastewater being amalgamated into another body. But we don't know where all that sits, and we've got a lot of discussion to have. So how flexible are we around changing this, and when would that likely occur?
We'll have to be very flexible. As we noted in the report, because of the uncertainty, we would have to start framing it on business as usual. But as Craig mentioned in the introduction, there has been, since we drafted this report, and as yourself and the CE have mentioned today, there has been a lot of activity in that space. If council signs up to under MOU by the end of August to work with the government, that still predicates working through to June 2021 before a final decision has to be made as to whether we go forward or whether we don't. Now, by that stage, you're looking to sign off your long-term plan and your infrastructure strategy. So we're going to have to be flexible enough to be able to work through what we believe the status quo is, and then also have scenarios if we have to change on the way through. And it's quite clear, I believe, and the guidance is that there will have to be amendments to long-term plans arising from the Three Waters Review. I think that will be a given at some point.
So the recommendation is that the council notes a list of significant assumptions and uncertainties proposed for the purpose of informing the activity management plans 2021 through 31. The significant assumptions and uncertainties listed are amended only where required by a change in legislation or approved by the group manager of the structure or project manager for long-term plan. Mover and seconder. Moved to Councillor Lyle, seconded Epihar.
Did we make a comment that there is with recommended changes? Rather than just noting what was presented, we did actually note some changes, and the recommendation doesn't reflect that.
Yep. So we just don't have what those recommended changes are written in front of us, so it's hard to know exactly what they were. But if it's noted that council notes a list of significant assumptions, and including those highlighted by councillors during discussion. Does that cover it, Mark? So we'll just change the recommendation at the top of the mover and seconder. Happy with that? All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Murray?
Just a point of clarification, would it be useful, given the uncertainty around a number of aspects, if we brought this report back in, say, 3 months?
That'd be great.
For
Yes.
review?
Yeah. And Murray, I wonder too, when it's brought back, the level of uncertainty is there around, you've got high, moderate and low, but just colour coding them, so that actually at a glance we can kind of see how many of our assumptions are pretty low risk, but how many sit in that space where things could change quite quickly for us.
And we could even have arrows pointing whether they're going up or down.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Item number 5 is the proposed closure of Halkett Community Pool. Now, it's recommended that the Halkett Community Pool be closed for the 2020-2021 season due to health and safety and operational concerns, and that long-term closure and demolition of the Halkett Community Pool be part of the long-term plan consultation process. Denise, welcome to the meeting. And James.
This is the third formal meeting of council that this report has been tabled at. Initially, the report was tabled at the Audit and Risk Committee meeting, and it was permitted to be progressed to a portfolio meeting discussion and subsequently permitted to be progressed to the council meeting. So this is the third meeting that this report is being presented to, and I'll ask James to just talk you through some of the key issues associated with the proposal.
Thank you, Denise. As Denise mentioned, this matter has been through Audit and Risk as well as a brief to council. Over the past 2 seasons, additional support and procedural development's been offered to all the community-run swimming pools. Prior to last season, full water risk management plans and additional testing was developed and accepted by all the committees, which is really great to see. Additional communication was actually held with Halkett Pool Committee around the proposed hours of operation and the implications of the testing required. So because they wanted to run quite large hours of operation, they needed some additional testing to take place. The testing needs to take place every 3 hours. That was also accepted by a committee representative, so we confirmed those hours and provided them with water test sheets. However, in practice, the testing lacked in both frequency and is detailed in Appendix 1. Unfortunately, it sometimes lacked in the proper chemical composition as well. So for 11 days, as outlined in that letter, there was essentially no treatment or filtration of that water, so exposing pool users to quite high levels of risk. Once this was identified by officers, it was quickly acted upon and communicated to the committee, and the letter was sent with the urgency around remedying the water quality issues. Of greater concern, perhaps, was we did provide additional support to get us through the rest of the season, and that did involve quite a few site visits by council officers. Perhaps of greater concern during that time was the recognition that the level of knowledge from the committee members was quite low around pool operation, and it was clear that they're doing their best for the community, and they had their hearts in the right place, but the outcomes that we were seeing were not up to standard at almost at any time, and perhaps unknowingly they are putting their community at risk, which is unfortunate. Comparable sites being Colinchi and Leeston have seen significant improvements in their water quality, and I'm really quite comfortable with the direction that they're starting to head in, and they're often really responsive to issues raised by elected members or by officers around health and safety, so it's really good to see. To that, I'll happily open the floor to any questions and do my best to answer them.
I guess we've received a letter from the chairman, and we really need some feedback as to your response to that, because it's critical for our decision making today, in my view.
In summary, I'll get James to go through the specifics of the letter, but there was a response made to it. It would be fair to say we have a slightly different view of the some of the facts that were being contested, and so I'm surprised that you weren't party to the receipt, because the reply to the chairperson was CC'd to, I thought, to all of those that were in the original. So my apologies if you didn't receive a copy of that. But it just we refuted some of the statements that were made and provided some email evidence of some of the conversations that did occur. But you might like to add something, Jane.
Yeah, speaking specifically to the letter, I think there was some commentary around not being able to touch the controller. The response to the initial email that was sent there was from me saying I'm happy to attend site on Monday and start the controller if you wish. The response from the committee member was, I don't see any issues with that. We'll basically, I can't remember it word for word, but we'll basically keep moving on it. So I did not attend site on that Monday to get it started. So some of the other things are around availability of water quality testing courses. Those courses, the reason that we ran them on site at a Selwyn location was because they're very tricky to get public courses. The courses fill out very quickly from school caretakers and things like that. So it was really unfortunately, it's kind of a one-shot deal to get them on that course, and to have them pull out last minute was very tricky to try and rectify during that season. Additional things, like I've just mentioned, was that we started this communication in October in terms of the requirements that we're asking for, and we got responses and acceptance throughout, and then in practice they generally demonstrated that they weren't going to follow those recommendations or the procedures provided to them, which is also disappointing.
Just for the newer councillors, I guess just a wee bit of revision would be helpful, if that's okay. Just in my tenure in the Audit and Risk Committee, this was a very hot issue around community pools when health and safety legislation came in, and a lot of councils throughout New Zealand made wholesale closures of pools. At that stage, we were of a mind that we had a community where we wanted to encourage an aquatic strategy and keep pools open as long as we could. The flip side of that was this needed significant community engagement and willingness to meet the rules and the health and safety principles that were going to be required to make this happen. There's always the view of this council, or particularly the Audit and Risk Committee, that this day might come where unfortunately one of our facilities wasn't up to scratch, and we would have to make this hard decision. And I suppose we're here today at that very point. So this hasn't been arrived at overnight. There has been a long history of trying to understand risk, both to our communities and our ratepayers, from having these community facilities going. So just a wee bit of backstory for this one.
Yeah, thanks. Look, that's a good summation, Grant, and I think it basically sums up where we arrived to as an Audit and Risk Committee when this was first brought to us, and it was the decision of that committee to recommend to Greater Council that proceed with closure. We've got to be very mindful of the fact that as council officers attending here, they've got to present us with information about health and safety compliance, and it would be remiss of us to not take that information on board, instruct officers to go against health and safety legislation and compliance, and it leaves us in a very vulnerable position as a council. So I think that's worth stating. as we've seen from the correspondence, some items of those have been contested, and I think the reply has gone back and answered those questions fully. And whilst I'm not comfortable about any closure, as Councillor Miller has alluded to, we have to meet the requirements of the pool testing and Health and Safety Act. And unfortunately, unlike other smaller committees who have managed to achieve that to our satisfaction, unfortunately, Halkett haven't been able to do so.
Mover and seconder for the report, Murray and Sophie Guinness. Any further comments? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Thank you. Item number 6 is Regulatory Manager and Team Leader for Compliance. Billy is here and Sue is here too. It's recommended that Council resolve to grant an annual permit to both Lime and Lava e-scooter providers following the completion of a trial period to allow any further permits to be managed by staff under the Public Places Bylaw provisions. Billy.
Kia ora. Brought Sue along because Sue's looked after the day-to-day aspect of this project and will continue, not to preempt a result of this meeting, but it will continue if a permit is put in place. So the purpose of this report is to come back to Council after 2 earlier reports to discuss the trial. History was we had application by Lime Scooters to start with. There were some significant issues Council wanted addressed. We addressed those with Lime and Lava, then applied as well, and we saw a point to give both a trial. And in December, Council resolved to give a trial. That trial was started on the 12th of December and was running very well. Initially, we had a few complaints. 11 of them were for visual immunity issues, people not liking the look of scooters. But generally speaking, we had very few complaints and continue to have no complaints at the moment. The trial was running very well before COVID hit, and we allowed the trial to continue longer after to make up that time. I know the report's coming to Council just before the trial finishes, but that was seen as a prudent position to take in light of if the permit is allowed, there's continuation and consistency with approach for the companies. So we've had the trial going. There's been approximately 22,000 trips with only 14 complaints on most of those for visual immunity issues. All other complaints being dealt with appropriately and quickly. Both companies have worked really hard with us to make sure things are done properly and there's a professional outlook taken. We've collected data and we've been able to get that data through a third party called Ride Report. That particular company has given us that data for free for the whole trial. There is a charge with that, but that, if a permit is given, will be passed on to the two companies. Both companies have asked for a reduced number of scooters because COVID has taken a toll, and we're at a point where we've come to Council to ask 2 questions. One is, can they have a permit, and if so, to pass that back to staff as an operational sense moving forward.
Great, thanks, Billy. And it's been a bit of a long journey through this to get to today. It's pleasing to see that there was a high use pre-COVID of the scooters, and I guess also pre-COVID was summer, and now the weather's a bit different outside too, so there's those changes in there as well. I think that it's appropriate that going forward decisions will be made at a staff level rather than coming back to Council and dealt with as you've suggested under the bylaw. So thank you for bringing it to our attention today. I had one question just around the end of life of scooters, and you might not be able to answer this, but I think it's just an important piece of conversation to have with those that are putting scooters on on our roads. Just what happens at the end in OE. We've seen pictures overseas of warehouses being filled up with unused bikes that were for public use and are now, they've become rubbish. And yeah, just what happens for these two providers? Is that part of the discussion that you have with them when they sign up, or could it be going forward? It's an environmentally friendly travel option when you're using them, but the whole of life cost of scooters just would be interesting as well.
Well, I think that's a good point, and it's not something we have considered, but we will consider it when we talk to them if it's resolved today that we go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Alexander.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for a very good report. To the extent that I was amazed at the precision of your charging calculations, I would have rounded it up to $73 a scooter rather than 72, 79. It might save the accountants having to count those last 79 cents per scooter. But more importantly, how are you going to manage the variance in numbers through the permitting system? Is it going to be the staff function that if they find that their 220 is not quite enough, that they'll just come back to the staff and say, can we have another 30? And you'll just alter the permit and that's just report that you've done that rather than coming back for permission? Is that how the system will work?
We will put in the report, into the documentation, that there's an option for them to come back to us, and that'll be then discussed and decided by staff, appropriate staff at the time. So yes, there'll be a provision in the permit for that to happen.
Thank you. Grant, and then Sophie.
Good afternoon. Now, as I recall it, this particular councillor is not no longer here, but I certainly want to speak on their behalf. One of the major concerns around this trial was safety and how many accidents occurred as a result of riding scooters. Have you got any data, how many people have fallen off, broken arms, broken legs, cuts, bruises? Has that been provided by the scooter company? Because that was our primary concern.
The answer to your question is we haven't had any data on accidents.
Sorry, does that mean that nobody's fallen off, or does it mean you haven't got the data?
No, we haven't been given any data, but we could seek that data.
Well, my recollection was that was fundamental to the concern around the table, is that given at that time in Christchurch there were a substantial amount of people who were falling off, breaking legs, doing things, and I guess that seems to have quietened down with the familiarity of the actual use of the device, but it would be worthwhile to understand the crash data or accident data if it was available.
Yep, we'll collect that ongoing from now if that's something that needs to be collected.
Thank you, Billy. Yes, and Sophie.
Hi guys, thank you very much for the report. I guess my first thing is more of an observation that there seem to have been quite a low number of complaints, which is great. I wouldn't necessarily take that as a low number of people who haven't had to shift them off pathways themselves, because I know I've done that several times and it just wasn't worth the hassle of making a complaint. I could do it for myself, even if I was then having to shift my buggy around the thing while I was trying to shift it. And in fact, Councillor Epihar saw me moving one off the footpath just this morning. So I guess hopefully that would be less of an issue in time, but that's a behaviour thing. My main question though was, obviously there's been quite a lot of much lower use since lockdown, and I saw there was a note, I think it was waiting for the uni students to come back to Lincoln. Fair enough, that might pop a few more of them back in there, but it has been very low. I haven't seen a Lime scooter since March, at least not in Rolleston. So my query there is, if there's a rental fee per e-scooter, and they've said that they want to put, say, 150 out, is there some sort of comeback where potentially they might come back and say, oh, well, actually, we only put 50 out, so we're only going to pay for 50?
They could come back and say that, but no, that won't happen. They're getting charged for the number they're asking for originally. So they're asking for 150, and that's what they'll be charged on, and they need to pay it up front before they can start. So we expect to have all of that sorted out pending a resolution next week, so they're paid before they start.
Good to know. Thanks.
Sure.
Got up, Billy and Sue. Thanks very much for the report. I just, with the use of geofencing, is it possible to extend the trial further out into some of the smaller communities?
There's always that possibility. I suppose if the e-scooters came back to us and asked that question, we'd evaluate it based on what we know now. For instance, I always thought Darfield was somewhere that they may ask.
With the,
Set up.
sorry, excuse me, yep, with the new pathway going in between Leeston and Dawston, there could be an opportunity there.
Yep, sir. So if they do come back to us in the future, we'll assess it as we would under the public places bylaw provisions.
Sorry, thank you.
Grant.
Sorry to ask another question. Just it struck me that the annual fee is a brand new fee, basically, isn't it? $72. Are we just proposing it get put into the general pot, or are we proposing that we do look to ring fence it and say, well, this could be used for alternative transport methodologies or assistance, or is it? Once we start throwing it into Rick Bell's pot, it never gets out, as we know. So last chance saloon, I mean, just putting it forward.
I'd like to support Councillor Miller and suggested it could go into the footpaths budget. As most of the scooters will be used on our footpaths, perhaps it can go into use extending our footpaths and cycleways between our townships.
Rather than make an ad hoc decision, maybe we can just park that and come back.
Something for us to consider, Grant. That's a good suggestion. We won't make that determination today. Do we have a mover and seconder for the report? Alexander and McInnes. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Declare it carries. Thank you, Susan and Billy. Number 7 is acquisitions, disposal and leasing manager, asset manager transportation. I think Andrew's with us today around electric vehicle charging station site licensing. 4 recommendations: support the collaborative project for the location of electric vehicle charging stations between Selwyn District Council, Orion ChargeNet on council-owned, controlled and leased land across Selwyn District. Approves the form, approves the installation in Springfield, Castle Hill, Arthur's Pass, Dunsandel, Lincoln, Leaston as detailed in Schedule 2, and approves that the group managed property is delegated the authority to approve on behalf of council. So Douglas, hands to you, and Andrew.
Just one item which we should raise. The Leaston site, nothing wrong with that site, but those buildings are potentially not going to be there long term. So I think we would still put the resolution and the schedule to you as it is. We need to bring it to the attention of Orion that it's likely to not have those activities around it, and there might be a better site in the future somewhere in Leaston. So just with that provision noted in the minutes, the rest of the report I'll let Andrew speak to or answer any questions you have.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that to our attention. We have gone out for public consultation or consultation to our communities in terms of our township committees and hall committees and people like that. On these sites, we've had no adverse comments, so we're all clear in that respect. I think the report is relatively self-explanatory in regards to the favourable outcome we're seeking with you adopting these recommendations in terms of establishing further EV sites in the district. It's something that myself and Rob Allen have been working on for some time, and Rob extends his apologies. He would have liked to have been here to support the report, but other circumstances meant he couldn't. So really it's down to the fact that we're taking a coordinated approach with Orion and ChargeNet. We're bundling up the licensing agreements, trying to get consistency across those and representing council's best interests in terms of a coordinated approach. There's no cost on council to this. This is all paid for by Orion, ChargeNet, NZTA, Energy Association. So we're actually doing our part as well in regards to facilitating this agreement. The question has been raised before about in terms of the fact that we're not charging a license fee for the first 5 years, and we are basically taking the approach that we are trying to deliver something of public good. The other point to us is that for Orion and ChargeNet, there's a very high capital cost to install these sites. You're looking at about $70,000 for a high capacity charging site. And so on that basis that we also included in the agreements that we had a fairly tight provision in regards to if we needed to move them on, they've got 2 months notice after a 24-month period that the site's been installed. So it sort of swings and roundabouts in terms of trying to achieve some public good, but also protecting council's interests in regards to the fact if we need the sites for something going forward, as exactly as Douglas has just raised as a really good example. So really this is pretty much it in a nutshell. The other main point about it is it's not just for the first 6 sites that we've got here, but the provisions of the agreement set out a framework so that further EV sites can be added to the agreements under the delegation of the property manager who's sitting right next to me. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. And so happy to take any questions from there, but I think it's a really good outcome for council to support this type of initiative.
Yeah, it's a really good outcome, the electrification and move away from petrol and diesel vehicles, long term for our world is important, and that's part of the journey New Zealand's on at the moment. So this won't be enough sites, and great to see that there's the ability for further sites to be included. I just wonder about the timing and our ability to turn around these decisions a little quicker. Than this has taken quite a long time to get to this point. Is the delegation to Douglas, is that going to speed up this process, or do we have other ways internally of ensuring that things don't quite take as long as this first tranche?
Absolutely, and that was the whole intention, so that we could speed up. And so basically we've used these first 6 sites as sort of, test the whole thing out. And as I said, the licensing agreements provides the framework to allow the further sites to be added pretty much instantaneously on the approval of the property manager, because that was a definite outcome that we wanted to speed things up.
Yeah, just want to mirror those comments, Sam. I think looking through, not being a legal expert by any means, of course, but it appears we've covered off as many bases. Every time I thought of a problem, I kept reading and found the solution in there, even down to site remediation at the end of its serviceable life. So well done, and look forward to more of them being broken out. So yeah, congratulations.
Thanks, guys. I just wanted to say this is pretty awesome. I know quite a few eco-friendly type people in Christchurch who've commented that they haven't been out to see the Springfield Donut or Arthur's Pass with kids because their EV doesn't go that far. So they've got no excuse after this. So that's great.
Yeah, I was the person who raised the question about admin costs, and I'm quite happy with the response regarding that, because we've just got to be a little bit careful when we're offering people free agreements that we're not ending up adding cost to ourselves. I think it's a good positive idea. Hopefully these people, while doing their 30 minutes of charging, will use our local business people and return some investment to our district, rather than pulling up at a fuel station, spending 30 seconds filling their tank and just going straight away again.
Item number 8 is the solid waste manager, Andrew Boyd, recommended that we receive the solid waste monthly update for information. Andrew has said that it's pretty self-explanatory what's in the report. If we have any questions, he's happy to answer them. Moved Councillor Lyle, seconded Councillor Miller. Are there any questions? All those in favour, please say aye. Against, declare it carried. Item number 9 is asset manager, transportation and team leader.
Sorry, Sam, other than to note that the solid waste levy is going to, the government's proposing to put it up over $60 over the next few years, so there will be an increase in costs in solid waste.
Yes,
which will be passed on.
Thanks, Grant. Item number 9, pages 228 through 250, transportation monthly update. Andrew, welcome back.
Thank you very much. I bring to the table with me Rebecca, who's going to help us out with a little bit of a presentation on the item regarding our performance measures and the road efficiency group. So I'll run through a few of the updates from my perspective, and then we'll have a little look into that for you. Okay. So on the basis of I've done before, I'll sort of go through on a useful comment basis as opposed to ticking off absolutely everything. In regards to the GPS, Murray touched on it before in regards to where we're sitting with that. Latest news from NZTA is that that's going to the NZTA board at the end of August, with the idea of government adopting it before the elections. As you pointed out, Councillor Mark, there's always that risk that an incoming government may very much turn things around, and we've been in that position before, so we know what to expect, and it's not particularly pleasant if that happens. In regards to the just move on to the Greater Christchurch Partnership. There's quite a lot happening in that space at the moment. I've talked about before about the PT Futures business case. As you may be aware, quite a lot of work has been done on that in regards to the foundations and rest of network business cases, which at the moment is showing that we're going to get a mediocre patronage degrees for a significant amount of expenditure that would need to be funneled into that. This was taken to SEAG in terms of a paper explaining where this was at and these type of ramifications coming out of it. And on that basis, SEAG has asked for the partnership staff consultants to come back and give the councils a briefing. And so we've organised this for you on the 5th of August, which will go through these aspects in a little bit more detail, because there is quite a bit of detail, and I'm sure you'll have questions, which hopefully can all be covered off at that point. The other part of the PT Futures business case process is around the mass rapid transit business case, and we've had our first workshop across the partnership on that a couple of weeks ago. I would have to say the jury will still be out, as far as I'm concerned, for some considerable time to understand where this is going to have to come from, where it's going to have to get to in terms of something that's going to be useful, if you want to put it that way, or something that is going to drive some benefit. Certainly we have some challenges in having to basically merge together what we need to do on a future land use perspective to also how we approach delivering transport for the district and indeed for the region. So it's going to be very much a watch this space, and through myself and through Councillor Reid, we will be obviously on top of this through the PT Joint Committee and all the respective project steering groups and things like that. In regards to what's next on my list, in terms of major strategic transport projects, I'll jump into the Rolleston State Highway corridor improvements. So as we've probably mentioned to you before, we're working through finalising the business case process with the NZTA. And so again, that has now sort of come to a conclusion and a preferred program or option. And so again, we've organised for the NZTA to come and talk to you on the 5th of August to outline that and answer any questions you may have at the time. In regards to Prebbleton upgrades, there's, as you're probably aware, there's a report coming further in the day in regards to progressing those land acquisitions through the Public Works Act. We've done, again, a lot of work between the last meeting and this one in regards to trying to negotiate agreed purchases, and we've been successful on, I would say, a 2+1 basis, 2 being directly associated with the project and another in terms of a future upgrade on the intersection list for Prebbleton. Bianca will be helping with that presentation or driving that presentation. I would have to say that the amount of work that's gone into that by Bianca and the property team is outstanding. And we want to get to a position where while we have the big stick under the Public Works Act, we don't want to be wielding it unless we really have to. There will be some occasions where we really have to, but we're working really hard to make sure that we have a negotiated agreement. But we'll fill you in on that a bit more later on in the afternoon. We've just talked about the EV sites in the report, so thank you very much for adopting that. We're very pleased with that outcome. The other one, in terms of this morning, you were talking about the Rolleston Town Centre. Certainly, we've heard what you were saying in terms of a few concerns on some transportation aspects, and no doubt as part of the project team, we'll all be coming back answering those list of questions you have on those sort of matters and all the other bits and pieces as well. So I'll leave it for that time to get into that. The other one that's probably been fairly topical lately, of which you've been asking questions on, is about our LED streetlight installation project. I've just had some updated information through this week. Essentially, we're around 76% complete on our light renewal install. That's across 3,500 what we would call standard lights. On that basis, there's around 800 lights to go, which we have those lights in stock. So it's just really having to basically wait or work through the ability of the contractor to throw those up on the poles. Again, we have the issue with the decorative lights. I understand that that's still pending, but we're still having to work through that. Our focus has been on getting the most of those other lights organised and up as soon as we can. There has been some delays when I'm not entirely happy with the progress of the contractor, but we've been reminding them of their obligations in terms of what they need to provide for us and when, and in regards to NZTA funding requirements. The last one on my little list before we go to have a talk with Rebecca on the road performance measures is around the walking and cycling projects. We certainly know through the annual plan submissions and deliberations that there was a number of projects or additional projects that are coming out from suggestions from the community and yourselves. So when we went back, we've now got around a list of 27 of those projects, not only the standard walking and cycling ones from a transport perspective, but also these more recreational based ones. So we've had a discussion between the infrastructure groups and the property groups in terms of how we may divvy these up and progress them. And I'm pleased to say that we've got a way forward on that, and we'll be working through that on a collective basis for the LTP. It's going to be pretty much that we can't do everything that everybody's asking for, but we're definitely going to be looking for winners and those that we can progress sooner rather than later, on the understanding that, as we've talked about before, there's lots of fish hooks with these type of projects that actually can take quite a bit of time to resolve. A few of you are nodding your heads, so you know what I mean. Okay, that's great. All right, well, this is the bit where we jump into the presentation that Rebecca's going to run through. So essentially the Road Efficiency Group, which is a sort of amalgam of Local Government New Zealand and NZTA, it looks in terms of how we best create efficiencies in terms of how we're delivering our transport activities. And so this has been going on for a long time, establishment of the One Network road classification system, and now also they've been working for quite a long time on performance measurements so that they can get a basis, or we can all get a basis of consistent reporting and ideas, and an idea of how we compare to other councils, our peer groups, and where perhaps we may have issues. So this is the first time this report has been issued. And so we're coming to grips with it as well in terms of understanding all the nuances of how they may pull data together. But I think just from a general sort of snapshot picture that we're going to present to you, we just want to make sure that you're comfortable where we're sitting with things, and that actually we're sitting pretty jolly comfortably on a lot of these aspects. But if there's any specific questions you have, we may need to go back and look at that in more detail if we can't answer them today. So I wonder, we've got that to throw up on the screen. Oh, okay. All right. Do you want this? Okay, I'll try.
So yeah, Andrew actually already did mention sort of my main point, that it is the first time that they've presented this, so it's a bit of a work in progress with them. It's quite there's an encompassing set of measures to sort of grasp how we're performing as a road controlling authority. So we thought we'd best start with maybe drawing attention to some of the areas that we're doing particularly well in. So as you can see, the procedural audits are particularly strong. So sort of all our internal processes that lead up to the delivery stuff is chopping up very well. There's not a comparison with that in terms of how we're doing compared with other local authorities. So we could be doing extremely well, or we could be doing as well as everyone else, but we'll go with extremely well just for our own confidence. The particularly good ones off to the right hand side of this one are the cost efficiency of the investment. So we track particularly well compared, so it's underneath on this one. We're tracking particularly well compared with our peer group. So we're spending less per kilometre, investing less for similar or better outcomes, which is quite a good place to sit. So we're getting a more efficient outcome for there. And then just one other quite important note is just the length versus VKT. So in the bottom right-hand corner, it just shows the distribution of trips across the length of the network. So in our arterial and primary collector routes, they're not a big percentage of the network, but they carry over half of the traffic on the network. So it sort of gives us an area that we need to focus a lot of the efforts on, whereas you see that the sort of lion's share of the network only carries about 7% of the traffic. So it's sort of, the proportions are a bit heavy at the arterial end of it. I think those were the main ones that we just wanted to bring up, so we're going to open it up for questions.
Thank you, and thanks for the presentation and running over that. I think I spoke with Andrew about this. There's a few things that this is the first time we've received this report, so it means now we've got a baseline to be able to think about how we improve. And the one that stood out for me was around data quality. It's one of the yellow dots on the first page, and it comes in at some improvement needed. And yeah, just thinking about how we collect data or share data. Do we know why we were downgraded for our data quality?
We've had another assessment that said we'd ranked in the top 10% of territorial authorities for data quality. I wonder with this slight downgrade whether it's just that they don't want us to sort of rest with what we're doing, whereas by giving us the some improvement, it just prompts us to continue driving with the quality so that we don't relax and get complacent and then have it drop back off again.
The other point too is that because we're such a high growth district and we're having a huge amount of vested assets being vested in us, we actually have a big job to keep up with actually getting that data captured and into our systems. So compared to some other councils that may have 10 metres of new footpath, we have 10 kilometres of new footpath that needs to go in. As a very broad example, and that extends even to the likes of streetlights. And for instance, we've found through our renewal program that we've actually, some of our existing streetlights have not been in the database, and so we've been capturing those. And that's the sort of thing that you can basically get, I suppose, tripped up on in some of those data quality measures.
And your comment around we're in the top 10% of TAs, and I guess that's reflected in NZTA not wanting to increase funding for renewals and maintenance work that as a district we might see as being quite important. And the comment that you made around we're spending less than our peer group per kilometre road, we're about $5,000 a kilometre, as opposed to the peer group looks at about $8,000 or $9,000 a kilometre is good, but it also means that it appears that we're underspending as well compared to the length of network that we've got, and trying to find that balance between what is the condition and then what's the requirement for extra expenditure when we already know we overspend in the maintenance side of things every year anyway. So I guess how do we use these figures to make sure that our long-term plan discussions and decisions around that and in future roading contracts truly reflects what's needed to be done, and not just trying to stay below where our peer group is?
So I did notice that the peer group that we're in is a rural district peer group, and it's for 10% or less urban network, but we actually have just over 13% urban network now. So we've been, strictly speaking, we're being compared to the wrong peer group, so we should be up in comparison with I think Waimak district is in they call them provincial districts. And when you run the cost efficiency comparison with provincial districts, we're much closer to that peer group than we are to this one. So if we were then changed into the rightful peer group, we'd be tracking better, and we'd, as you say, be less likely to have them scrutinising our.
Right, and we'll advocate for that. So the next REG document that comes out will have the right peer group.
Hopefully, I've put it to them already that I've noticed that it's different, and they said they'll bring it up.
Okay. If you need a signature, let me know. Next up, Councillor Hassan is on my list, Alexander and Miller.
Thanks, Andrew. Can we go back to your previous report with regards to the update? I understand that local government is now actually agreed to fund the flyover from Molliston. flyover in
Central
Rolleston across the state highway.
Government has.
Yeah, central government, sorry, central government.
Yep.
Does anyone know, because I've had a few inquiries, does anyone know what's the plan, where it's going, timeline? Is there any information that we can possibly give out to our public on that particular issue because of the congestion that is actually happening in that location?
Oh, absolutely. And so basically, we've been pushing hard for NZTA to come up with a comms plan on it. But the first thing I wanted them to do was to present the preferred option to you, so you had advanced understanding of what it consists, and then we'll go public. So basically, in a nutshell, the funding of the flyover plus all the upgrades, most of the upgrades between the end of CSM2 and Burnham are part of the $60 million NZ Up government funding package. And so essentially that has been given the tick of funding. It can proceed, but it has to be integrated into the outcomes of the business case, which we'll be presenting to you. And essentially the government said at that time when they announced that funding approval that they wanted to see, things happening out there by 2022. So there's quite a lot of work that has to be done in a very short space of time to meet that time frame. And we're hoping to get a much better understanding of that as we now go forward, now that the business case has been nailed down, we have got a preferred option. I know, talking to the current CSM2 project manager, he's itching to get into this and is already doing some scouting missions to see what's happening down this neck of the woods, because they know they need to get onto it. But we wanted to talk to you guys first about it.
Time frame for talking to us?
Oh, that was the 5th of August, which I mentioned before.
That's the briefing.
Yep. Yep.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. In your report, Andrew, you talked about the Dawson's to Templeton cycleway. The NZTA funded?
Sorry, the which one? The
extension of the Rolleston to Templeton cycleway, the last piece, Dawson's Road to
Yes,
Templeton.
it's funded through our low cost, low risk program. We tried to get it funded separately, but they didn't like that idea. And so plan B was to work it through low cost, low risk.
Thank you. And in the RCA report, talking about data quality, on page 239 in our agenda, the Selwyn population figure is simply wrong. It says 35,000. We haven't been 35,000 for a little while. So, I mean, that you're talking about the quality of the data in the report, that did give me some concern about the quality of the report when the population figure is
Explanatory document.
it's the one, how the results are presented and information sources. It says our population 35,709.
I think that one's a generic header rather than that one specific one.
It's not
Not that one, it's further down in our agenda.
Yeah. No, I think that caught me as well. I think it's just a generic one as an example of what they're interpreting rather than the Selwyn specific one. Because I also looked at that and went, that's
Not right.
not enough people.
Okay, well, thank you for the way it was presented. It looked like it was saying our population was sort of 20% lower than we are, and I went, no. Sorry, thank you.
Councillor Miller.
From my perspective, it's ironic what side of the table you're on about what you see. And I guess from my side of the table, what I'm looking at is outcomes. If you're a cyclist in Selwyn, it doesn't look so good for you. No matter, we've spent a lot of money on cycleways. If you look at that graph in the bottom left-hand corner, serious and fatal injuries are spiking significantly. And the same with walking, we're above the average for actually having an accident or being hurt. So, and you get down further to customer outcomes, our serious and fatal injuries are all above the trend line. So maybe we shouldn't be focusing on the dollars being spent, but maybe we should be focusing on the outcomes, because at the moment we're not looking so flash. And if you go across the spending side of the equation, if you look on the bottom of page 1 of the REG document there, pavement rehab per kilometres and pavement resurfacing lane kilometres, both of them are under the national average. And if you sort of reflect back, they both co-align with us taking away the $60 annual roading rate. Well, there was a connection there. Maybe there's not enough money for them to do the job they need to do. So patting yourself on the back is good around trying to do things efficiently, and I commend the staff. They are doing an excellent job at trying to make limited dollars go as far as they can. But it's not resulting in the outcomes we want for our community, is it? And I really have to question whether our resources are being, not staff resources, commend you guys. I always do. But whether when it comes to LTP time, whether we're putting enough dollars into this basic sort of stuff rather than the nice to haves.
Yeah, thanks. I think the comment is, and what we have to be careful with these graphs, first time we've seen them, it's a very relatively short trend line, timeline on them. So for the walking cycling one, it only would take one or two serious incidents to actually drive that peak. And I think I know where that peak comes from, was that fatality that was down on Springs Road with a cyclist. And remember, it's in comparison to our peer group. So if they don't necessarily have one or two, then things like that stick out really well in that regards, or really badly in that regard, if you want to put it that way. Take your point about those indicators around spending. I think the thing is that where NZTA come from is they say, well, okay, great guys, you're doing a good job, you're being effective, efficient, you're spending less than everybody else, because in actual fact, the levels of service that you're providing and the condition of your network is not suggesting to us that you've got a problem compared to everybody else. And so you could actually argue that we're being very efficient and we're actually achieving really good outcomes compared to everybody else. So that's where you get into the situation where it's actually difficult to have those conversations with NZTA and say, please give us some more money, because we are not performing as well as we should, or our network's not performing as well as we should. And they turn around and say, compared to your peer group, you're doing really well, thank you very much. So it pretty much is a bit like that. And so that has always been our issue. And this is what we always have to push back with NZTA when we formulate our activity management plan, which underpins our program that goes forward to NZTA and of course to you as the council in terms of funding as well. So it's a bit of a interesting situation always in these regards, but we do our best to try and push our position as far as we can. But again, I think one of those other graphs also shows the amount of usage on the network. And if you look on that bottom right-hand graph, you'll see where most of our network is being used. It's definitely not in those, those low volume, low access type roads where I know we've all got an interest in terms of our wider community. It's all sitting up around those high use roads, collector roads, arterial roads, which is driving our program a lot in regards to where we need to target our funding and where we need to target the works we need to do on our network.
What was really pleasing from my point of view was the intersection graph that showed significant reduction. Selwyn was an intersection black spot, wasn't it really? But we're still above the national trend, but we've had a significant improvement. But
yeah,
I suppose the last thing before I go, this time 3 years ago we were promised a railway station, so to get some more offers, get the contract signed this time.
Double tracking this time. I think too. It's
I think we're getting a certain developer over the road to pay for that.
the timing around the $60 rate being removed too, while the rate might have changed, the funding didn't change. The funding was thrown into the general rate, and so it was just a different mechanism for collecting the same amount of funding. That's correct, Andrew?
Yeah, basically last time round we mentioned the $60 rate to NZTA, explained to them the reason why we felt like we had to impose it. To be fair, the NZTA picked up on that and essentially have funded the equivalent mostly of the $60 rate that we were applying ourselves through the increases to the program last time. So you've got to give them their due on that regard. But again, it comes back to how far you want to push it in regards to providing a level of service on some of those lower road classifications beyond what the NZTA are comfortable in subsidising.
And we've talked about targeted rating being part of the review for the long-term plan around the way other districts capture extra income from forestry providers or certain sectors of the of industry within their district too. So that will form part of the long-term plan discussions. Thank you, Rebecca and Andrew, for presentation. That was really good.
Thank you.
Do I have a mover and seconder to receive that? Alexander, Miller, all those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. The next item is a minor amendment to the Parks and Reserves bylaw. Moved Councillor Lyle, seconded Councillor Reid. Is there any discussion on this item? Councillor Hassan.
Look, I note the change is a consequential change, but where does this change sit under the Reserves Act, where we have the understanding from some of our community that their reserves are still invested in Department of Conservation, whereas in fact they were, but under 1989, I believe they were transferred over to Selwyn District Council to administer. And I just want some clarification around that, because there's still the understanding from some of our reserve committees that the management or the ownership of where their reserve sits is with the Department of Conservation and not council.
Is the answer to that going to change the outcome for today, Deborah, for you?
Just with regards to the mentioning of the Local Government Act versus the Reserve Management Act, just trying to understand, is there an issue between those two reserves?
Mark, is there an answer?
No, the status of the land has nothing to do with the actual bylaw itself, so that doesn't affect that at all. We can make the bylaw just under the Local Government Act, which is what we're doing. So it doesn't matter.
Thank you. That answers it, Deborah.
Sort of. Do we have any reserves that are still ministered under the Department of Conservation within our district that would not come under this bylaw?
All of the reserves that are managed where vesting and control or control and management has been vested in council as part of the 1989 amalgamation order are all covered by this bylaw. There may be other reserves that are dock reserves within the district, but certainly none of the domains or major recreation reserves that are managed by council.
Thank you. Any further questions? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Item number 11 is on page 258 through 303. It's a Te Wahora co-governance agreement. 3 recommendations: that we receive the report, endorse the restructure of the co-governance agreement in principle, and provide details of any amendments, should there be any today, that people would like to have considered for formalising within the final agreement. This is, was part of a briefing session recently and was part of a major council discussion over the last 12 months. Murray, is there anything you'd particularly like to highlight for us today?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Yes, we had a good discussion, robust discussion at the briefing session on this. The 5 parties are all concurrently working through looking at this agreement on the basis that they'll come back with any potential amendments. Then we'll all sit around through the joint officials group and agree on any suggested amendments. We'll take that to the co-governors. If they agree to amend the draft document, then we'll have to bring it back to council. Each party will have to take it back to their governors, their own governors, for ratification before it becomes in play for the December co-governance meeting. So there's a bit of work involved. We're ahead of most of the other parties because we turned around our legal opinion very quickly. So we're looking to get together in early August to go through and make any, discuss any final amendments. But as we noted at the briefing session, this is an opportunity to refresh the document. It clears up a lot of the confusion that was around the previous documents. It's a coming of age to some degree, and it actually enables the meetings from December onwards to be held in public. And that's one of the wishes of all the parties, is that there's much more visibility over the work of the co-governance. And I would just like to note, one of the work issues that the co-governors are working on is terms of achieving additional funding. In the past, we've achieved the additional funding through the MFE, through First Steps and other programs on the WDW project, which was a mainly tree planting, and the Whakaora Te Ahuriri project, which was creation of wetlands, just about complete. the anticipated cost of making significant improvement around the lake was upwards of $100 million. None of the parties have anything like that funding available, and there's no indication that that will come back to the party. What we're trying to do is to work collegially together to access as much central government funding through other, through all the programs that come, or through private philanthropic funding. And that's taken a big hit through COVID-19, and that's taking us has to be an opportunity to refresh where those funding streams might come from. But there is national and international interest into actually providing funding opportunities. And that's not forgetting the work that people like WET and TAC and all the other groups that are working around the lake are actually making a difference.
Cool. Well, thanks, Murray, and thank you to the team of staff who've worked with all of the joint partners to change this. It's really good to be making things more public and more open, and the transparency for the group is a huge step forward. The new document removes a lot of the confusion, as you've said, particularly around Schedule 2, which tended to treat all parties as if they were ECAN or extensions of ECAN, or that the relationship between ECAN and Ngāi Tahu should be the same for every TA in Ngāi Tahu. And the current agreement allows the separation of that to be a relationship as Selwyn District Council would like to negotiate with our local rūnanga, rather than just what ECAN has done. And I guess the council contribution of any dollars going forward is going to be part of the long-term plan discussion. So within this agreement, while it doesn't sign us up to a specific amount, it does say that we're a partner in this, and any confirmation of those dollars would be a long-term plan discussion, I'm guessing. Are there any questions that people have? Have a mover and a seconder?
No.
Councillor Miller.
I thought given the intensity of our briefing, there'd be a lot more debate. And in fact, I'm not in favour of having briefings where you have intense debate and then get to a meeting and rubber stamp it. I think it's quite undemocratic. It doesn't really reflect the mood of the people who spoke at the briefing. I just worked my way through the recommendation, and even starting at number 2, significance assessment compliance. This report does not trigger the council's significance policy. Here's a document which talks fundamentally about sharing statutory powers. If that's not significant to our ratepayers, what is? It must be significant. I can't see how it can be otherwise than significant to our ratepayers. If you go further down, talk about, this is down by number 7, those views affected. Maori implications, none. How can there be no implication to Ngāi Tahu? Got to be. Again, poor work. So if we go into the document itself and we talk about what does this mean for Selwyn? You're talking about the catchment of Te Waihora, which is all of Selwyn. So the whole of Selwyn is included in this organisation, this document. And it talks explicitly about statutory powers, sharing of, and what does that mean? Does that mean that us as governors here all of a sudden, by MOU, sharing the powers which we've invested in us by central government? Does it mean we agree to divest powers, which this document allows? It specifically says we can divest statutory powers to the co-governance group. So there's a range of things which are in this document here, which are very loose, non-specific. And I think as a group here, we're just rubber stamping and going, oh, well, it's all good here, chaps. It's nice and fluid, and we'll sort this out later. Later's not the time. Now is the time to be putting specific questions and saying, what does this really mean? How does this work on a day-to-day basis? And I want to emphasise that I personally, and the wider catchment of Selwyn, is right behind this proposal. They want to see Te Waihora restored and an environment that it surrounds it being a healthy and economic environment. But I'm not sure that this document is the way to go about it. I mean, it's the overriding concept is good, but it's very wishy-washy, very, we'll see about it later, chaps, and we'll see how we go. And I just can't sign up to it the way it is at the moment. And I may be a lone voice, and if I am, I'm better to be voted down. But I think we should all at least put a stake in the ground here and say, I support this wholeheartedly in its present form, or I would like to see further work done. I note in our legal advice from Buddle Findlay that it says it's open to interpretation. For instance, if a consent is required for a building permit which discharges stormwater, potentially that could require our co-partner's consent. Is this something that we're okay with? It may be. I'm not sure we've actually thought about it. So I encourage further thought before we rubber stamp this.
Murray, do you?
Just on a couple of points raised. Yeah, apologies around the marine implications. Yes, it's noted under 7A that Runanga Toronto actually involved in the whole process. In respect to the 5 defunction powers and duties to be jointly exercised, all this has done is taken away as Schedule 2 was in the original agreement, which implied that we would be delegating function to Runanga as ECAN have done in terms of their discussion. That it is up to each of our parties to sit down with Tront and work out whether we want to delegate any or share any responsibilities. There's no commitment. It's just putting a framework in that we can do it at some stage in the future if we want to. And that cleared away a lot of it, clarified a lot of what was misunderstood in terms of that 2012 Schedule 2, which actually rolled through every agreement and the like. But we all have the same view that we're here to focus on the lake. This agreement gives us the ability to work with our parties to do that, and we are doing that. And the parties have, we haven't got into detail, but the parties do have a strategy, do have an action plan, do have a funding plan, and are doing a lot of work, particularly this is a voluntary agreement. And we're working with the zone committee who have the statutory responsibilities around the zone as well. So it's yes, and it's just quite a bit of work to be done around the transactional costs of the organisation, and that's another piece of work being done at the moment. And by the simplifying the joint officials and the co-governance arrangement, we're actually reducing some of those transactional costs around meetings and alternates as well.
Thank you. Mark, Deborah, Murray. So if that's not the order you push your buttons at the assistant in front of me.
Thank you. I can assure Councillor Miller that I'm not simply rubber stamping anything that comes before us. It is unfortunate the way we work, that we've workshopped something and when it comes back to us, we've covered a lot of the issues that otherwise would have been discussed. That's a process issue that we perhaps as a council still need to address. The only change that I would recommend in this document, and I've indicated it prior, is in 3.3, I would add the following words at the end of the clause, as specified in section 5.1. Section 3.3 sounds a very broad description of what powers we're going to be sharing, whereas actually 5.1 ties it down somewhat more tightly and also says these can be mutually negotiated. So I would think that if 3.3 more formally referenced the clause in which these shared powers are specified, it would draw the reader into a more precise understanding of what we're actually sharing. We're not co-sharing all our statutory roles and responsibilities that local government has. We have a specified list that we're going to work with Ngāi Tahu and in particular more the iwi and that have their rohui overlaps with ours. I'm not afraid of this document. I'm not afraid of working collaboratively with them because every time I have, they've indicated they don't want to be council in duplication. They want to work collaboratively for the best outcomes of the lake, of Te Waihora, and of our district. And I think that's actually something that we should be very pleased at. We have a great relationship. It is growing and becoming stronger, and I'm not afraid of that.
Thanks, Mark, and I support that change to be included. I think for clarity, that adds a lot. Deborah?
Thanks, Murray, for mentioning that this is a voluntary agreement. Where in this document do I find that this is a voluntary agreement? Do I find it in the preamble? Do I find it, which particular clause do I find that this, in plain English, Trish, this is a voluntary agreement.
Somewhat, somewhat better adversed at
Because I think
procedure.
that's really, really important for our ratepayers to understand.
The voluntary nature means we don't have to be a member to this. It's not a statutory responsibility on council to be a member. But the agreement itself is the agreement. It doesn't have to say it's just a voluntary agreement. It is an agreement.
Yeah, that's right, Deborah. The voluntary process is the one that we're going through now. So by the mere act of adopting this, we are engaging that in a voluntary capacity to join with the rest of the groups.
So,
Deborah, with that, the voluntary nature was actually reinforced. I think Murray brought this to the feedback. All of the parties wanted it to remain voluntary and didn't want to end up in a space where the government had put it into statute. So I wonder whether in the preamble, like you're suggesting, it could even be the second word, this voluntary agreement, or this agreement entered into voluntarily by the parties, it would clarify that. I think that'll be well received by the other parties.
I think that's important to have a plain English understanding with regards to our ratepayers. With regards to, I guess, with our ratepayers and this involving all of our district, I support co-governance, but there is a limitation with regards to how many parties actually get involved in a co-governance issue, and the time frame about coming to a conclusion that could have major impacts on some of our landowners with regards to the process. And I'm just conscious that anybody participating in this process must give due diligence and be fair and reasonable in some of the requests that they've got on all parties with regards to the management of the issues around the lake. And I'm just highlighting that because, you know, this is affecting a lot of people's livelihoods. We affect a lot of people's livelihoods with regards to our statutory responsibilities. And I'm just conscious of the fact that we have climate change issues, we have various other issues, but we also have timeframe factors that need to be considered. And I just want to highlight that we really need to actually make sure that it, you know, that this understanding is in this document, you know, that it's not to actually hinder or uphold something or be awkward to any of the parties within this agreement.
Thank you. Councillor Lemon.
Yeah, I'm probably going to carry on a wee bit from where Deborah's landed there and mirror a wee bit of the concerns. I don't have perhaps quite the concerns that Councillor Miller has, in that this is a much improved document, Murray, on where we landed 6, 8, 10 months ago, whatever it was. Noting, of course, that was an agreement we already signed up to and the obligations that we had under that. And I think we're in an infinitely better place, but I still don't have the real assurance that I probably would like to have, despite comments here, and I look at H and J from the legal opinion of Buddle Finley, saying that it's an agreement to agree. I guess I really need some assurance that it's not tying us into, as Councillor Miller's alluded to, it's not tying us into outcomes that we don't foresee at present. And by that I mean almost like a representation review without holding one, in that we are tied to a certain outcome by other parties involved here, doing away, we've talked about statutory obligation, doing us out of the role that we have, that we hold, and also tying us into expenditure, a ratepayer expenditure, because we've tied a process up because of this agreement. If I can get some sort of assurance that that isn't the case, I guess I'm a lot more comfortable. I probably haven't articulated that particularly well, Murray, and apologies if I haven't. But I need to understand that we still make our own bylaws. We can take advice from these parties, but because it involves, as Councillor Miller is rightly said, our entire catchment, the effect is actually, although there's co-governors here and a number of parties involved, the effect is actually upon us, ultimately, from a rateable base. So hopefully I've been articulate enough to convey what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's probably not myself as an official advising co-governor, probably more of a way the co-governors operate. It's a very collegial process. Being in the room gives you a significant advantage of not being in the room. It means that our voices are heard. And we particularly vocalise those through things like lake openings, where we understand where our constituents and our ratepayers' views are. It enables us to have dovetail into the zone committee work as well. But I don't believe it obligates you to do anything other than to have open and honest agreement. But look, I might defer to our co-governor in that respect, because I think it's more of a political viewpoint.
Yeah, I just endorse what you just said. It's an agreement to be at the table and in the room for the discussion. Whatever we put, as Councillor Alexander has alluded to, that the schedule that we come up with in any further agreement is what we'd be committing to, as it says in 3.3 here. There is, we might want to work with other parties, and as Mark has said, as represented in point ... which currently is 0. So today we're not actually saying any of that. We're not getting into the detail of that. There would be a future discussion that would need to be had before we would agree to it. And secondly, because it's a voluntary agreement, that means we can opt out at any time. This isn't the government said we have to be a part of it. You're stuck in it forever, come what may. If things happen legislatively, whether that's part of the waters discussion or whether the ICOLs get used as lakes in the future, or whatever might come at us, that would give us an opportunity to revisit this. And I imagine, Murray, with the scope that we've had now, there'll be more regular reviews of what's in here as necessary when those changes come about. So yeah, from my point of view, I see it as this provides us a seat at the table to discuss something that is inherently important to our community, Te Wahora Lake Ellesmere.
And I think if there's a third thing to add to that, it is that any actions and all the cost of those actions are still going to go through our annual plan or our LTP process.
I guess that question then is, are we then bound to have to do those? And that's the question I've still got, I guess, is that is the recommendation of the co-governors. Does that bind us as a council to then having to implement those, or do we go through our annual plan process and we have the ability to reject that?
Yep, and we would only offer things at the co-governance level once this council has, I'm not there representing anyone other than us. So it's going to be what we put forward, and I think it's going to be made a lot easier when this becomes a lot more transparent. So the fact that it's going public will actually mean that the minutes, the decisions, the direction will be a lot more public facing, which will be helpful.
I think that's a point of distinction, Sam, that's really important, is that we therefore retain our statutory powers to operate and represent our community as per our obligations under the Act. So yeah, thank you.
Councillor, sorry, just Councillor McInnes first, and then.
Sorry guys, I just know the crux of it for me is more along the lines of, because there's obviously been many years that this is applied already in effect. Is this new version with all the various changes on it, is it in your opinion a fairer and better worded version of what is already in effect? Like, it's not somehow detracting it. Is it a positive move for us, or is it a negative move?
It's a much more positive move, because it doesn't tie us up to look like we're an ECAN. It actually treats us all as individual members of the.
Thought so, but with all the rest of the wording around, I just kind of thought that's kind of like just a basic look at it.
Do I have a mover and seconder? Move Lyle, seconded Hassan. All those in favour, please say aye.
Just a point of order before you pass that. I raised the point, is this a significant issue around significance? I want that determined by the Chief Executive. So the answer is no. So our significance policy lists those things that we have to go through a special consultative process on, the likes of our roads, our libraries, a number of listed infrastructure asset groups, but this is not listed in that policy. We review the policy each 3 years when we do the LTP. You might recall the last time we did it was down in Dunsandel. I guess my view is that's extraordinary to be excluded when considering the ramifications of this, potential ramifications. But, I mean, it's going to be voted on in a moment, but before I do, just to give you an example, you talked about $100 million perhaps to rehabilitate the lake. We decided on a 10% intervention, $10 million. We say $5 million to ECAN, $5 million to Selwyn District Council. What will happen is that ECAN will target that rate to Selwyn catchment. And so our ratepayers will end up paying the full $10 million, 5 through ECAN and 5 through SDC. So let's just give you an idea of how this is going to roll here.
And I think that keeping Christchurch is at the table as well. So actually that half or 5 million will actually be mostly Christchurch and a little bit of Selwyn.
Make a little corner of Table Hood. It's prorated.
We have moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Against? And one against to carried. Sure, it can be recorded, Councillor Miller's vote. Thank you. Thanks, Murray, for that. Item number 12 is Team Leader Transportation, update schedule for the Traffic and Parking Bylaw 2009. Mark Chamberlain. It's recommended that Council approves an amendment to the Schedule 4 of the Traffic Parking Bylaw 2009 to include 30-minute parking restrictions on the east side of Tennyson Street, Rolleston. Mover and seconder. Mugford. Lyle. Is there any discussion? Yes. Okay. Mark, yeah.
You present it first.
Tēnā koutou kai korehira. Just a couple of things in the report. The route position that's on there is 647 to 670 is what it should be, rather than 699 is on the screen and 669 in the document I got here. Just a couple of things that there are a few parking restrictions on Tennyson Street that have changed from what were there previously. There were some parking restrictions before. With the changes with the town centre upgrade, there's some additional ones there. So this is just for this 30-minute parking restriction outside the shops there. There's also some no stopping loading zones and bus bays that we're still confirming the location of them. So that's why the numbers probably aren't quite right, because of just what's actually in place. Just want to match those up. So there'll be another report for that. Just preempting a couple of questions that Alexander may have on that, as well as the 30-kilometre speed limit as well requires a report in relation to the setting of speed limit rules and the speed limit register. So there'll be another report coming for that, just confirming the extent of that, including Markham Way and that sort of thing as well. So there will be another report coming to confirm those restrictions as well. This is just for that 30-minute parking, which wanted to get in place and get the signs up. So.
Thank you. So the changes, the last number should be 600, is that what you're saying?
70.
670.
Yeah, so the RP is the route position along the road, so the distance from the start of Tennyson Street. So starting Saturday 1, heading down 647 to 670 is the length of that on both sides of the roads. Yeah, and so the other changes that should be there as well.
Thanks, Councillor Alexander.
Actually on both sides of the road, not just the east side as well.
I think I support the zone, but unfortunately I have to note that it's meaningless. We as a council do not enforce it, will not enforce it, and therefore it is meaningless until we actually start enforcing traffic restrictions, no stopping zones, and all our others that exist in our district. This is voluntary. This I will abide by it because that's of my nature. But until we actually start enforcing our traffic restrictions, this is meaningless. So it's foreshadowing another issue that I have raised with staff today, that we have got to move beyond the education and actually get to the enforcement stage of parking, because we are being ignored and flouted by our community, creating traffic safety issues in our communities because we are toothless tigers. It's nothing to do with Mark's team, but we as a council need to start actual enforcement. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Blanch.
Yeah, Mark is right. We do not enforce our own bylaws that well at the moment, but we always can if we need to. But the other thing is that the police department has the authority and the power to exercise any enactment, which means that they, I'm sure a letter from the CEO or the mayor saying that we have a problem in the short term, I'm sure our police department would enforce the parking as well.
Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Miller.
Could you just tell me what the real-time digital parking sign is? What does that do? Does it tell you somehow that how much parking you've got left or something, does it?
It's on the map.
It's at the bottom of the map, your digital real-time parking sign, refer adjacent detail. I couldn't find the detail of what that was.
I can't really explain what it is because it's not a project I've been involved too much in, but I'm guessing it's to do with the future signage to say when the town centre is fully developed, parking spaces are available or not. So just like you're going to Christchurch says, this car park's got 330 available, something like that. So that's what it is. Yeah.
Thank you. All those in favour, say aye. Against? Declare it carried. And if we could just have a motion to move the meeting past 2 hours, and we'll just take the next report before we move into PX. Alexander and Lyle. All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. So just the last item, or second last item, before we move, and we'll break before we have PX, is the property report. So Douglas, do you want to come to the front of the room? It's on pages 309 through 328.
Just as Douglas starts this report, Mr. Mayor, we did have a note in the matters arising from the previous meeting, an insurance update to the issues that were raised regarding insurance. I wonder if Mr. Marshall would like to address those at this time as well.
Douglas, if you can do that as well, that'd be good.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Alexander. So the issue was around pivot insurance. So we had specific pivot insurance. So these are irrigation pivots for Raeburn and Horata Farms. We have a specific policy for that. Our pivots on the Ellesmere wastewater treatment plant and our pivots on the Pines wastewater treatment plant are insured under our property our machinery policy. So they are all insured. I'm just checking, clarifying the logic of whether we have why we have the different policies. I think it's probably to do with the agricultural reasons for the farm ones. That might be the reason, but we're getting that clarified. So that clarifies that point, I hope. So we move into the report as it stands. So Selwyn Aquatic Centre, just to add one point we are working on at the moment is shortening up the program. So Armitage Williams have given us some options to consider. So currently our project team are considering those. There is some potential downside with how we have to shorten the program up, and so that's what's being considered, is to see whether that's a major imposition on our users or managing the actual running of the aquatic centre. So we'll hope to report on that very shortly as to what we think a process would be, but there's a potential to pull about 3, maybe 4 months out of that program if it's deemed appropriate. Next item on the report, Te Aratia. We have nothing additional from staff to add to that, other than that program is proceeding well, and obviously you can now look at that build. I think the key item to note is that we will very shortly have to close off Tennyson Street in front of the building. As you can imagine, there's a lot of structural work, facade to attach, and just for general health and safety reasons, we just will have to unfortunately restrict access to that part of the building. But that's obviously, although it's 8 to 10 months, it is necessary. Just the footpath is the expectation at this stage. Indoor courts, I think we've got nothing further to add. We talk on the solar program further on in this report. Next item on the agenda is the the Dines Park car park, which is now almost effectively complete, and the club room relocation. The relocation project is unfortunately one of those that has been challenging for parties, ourselves, definitely the rugby club, and also our contractor and their subcontractors. There's still a small piece of work to do. We are working through the program implications on the rugby club with the contractor currently, but definitely it's not all been helpful with the delays, and it's obviously rightfully in concern. The rugby club have been very vocal on it, and they should be. We have also been pretty vocal on this too with the contractor, and endeavouring to see what compensation is possible from this particular item. Staff have had to spend a significant amount of time sitting on this contract project to make sure it's achieved. So,
Douglas, is it our contractor and our responsibility to follow that up? Just sort of thinking back over the last 12 months, there's a lot of discussion around the timing of access to the old Rolleston Reserve and the rugby club there, and temporary moving down to Foster Park. And so here we are 12 months on, and without it being resolved, does seem like a very poor outcome. Does the responsibility lie with us, or is it with the rugby club, or is it with third-party contractors, or just where does that responsibility sit?
The contractors, subcontractors, it's fair to say, have not performed as well as would be desired from all parties, and that's probably themselves as well. There were certainly some, you call them delays, or getting the consents for activity took longer than expected. We started out a process using the outline development plan process for a number of items, and then pulled the rugby club out and did it as a separate resource consent process. There was quite a lot of consideration by the commissioner on giving that consent for that particular activity. That took longer than might have deemed to be acceptable, and I suppose in terms of the number of activities that the club wanted to run had to be reduced as well to make sure that it was seen acceptable. You can look at it from two ways. You can look at it from a resident near that facility, and glad that a process has been quite robust to make sure they're not going to be compromised. I think one of our presentations today talked about noise from activities close to residential areas. So I think there's a number of ways to look at that. COVID clearly has caused delays. Getting contractor and subcontractors back on site to actually get going again has been challenging. And then there's always that little issue during winter where there was a period of wet weather, which really did become challenging for all contractors. So none of those things are acceptable if you're trying to run a sports club on a limited season, though, as you can appreciate. So it's been a challenging project, it's fair to say. Brookside Road Lane subdivision, so there's not much more we'd add there. We're working through agents, so I think there's further work there that the Chief Executive is working through with you on some options as well. Responsible camping, so really we're now bringing an end to, I think, the funding there. We've got the last few of our toilets being upgraded and completed, so I would anticipate probably another 2 months and all those will be completed, although Hororata, the main toilet there, there's just issues we're working through there on the groundwater issues and the system that we put in place for that particular facility, so that's slightly more challenging than one would have anticipated. Camping activities, nothing more to add on that particular item at this stage. Surplus Crown, I'm giving you an update there. The Leaston Library Medical Centre, so staff have got a project plan meeting for next week, and we'll also look at the working party that council set up about 6 months ago on this project to see what the next steps will be, engaging with community on options and bulk and location plans to start to progress that particular both items. The medical centre side is further advanced in getting some design and development done in conjunction with the GP there in Leaston. Hororata, be aware of emails I've issued and quite a bit of community interest in the reserve plan or master plan for the reserve that we're undertaking at this present time, some consultation. Certainly quite a bit of interest from different groups on that plan, and a number of public meetings planned for next week, I think. So that process, when it closes on the 7th of August, will have had quite a lot of feedback we would expect, which is obviously always healthy when a community is interested in that matter. Earthquake prone, updated a few of our reports there. So Taitapu Library was pleasing to see that it is just above the threshold there for earthquake prone, which is good. And Mead Hall, you can see we've applied for some funding there from Provincial Growth Fund. Westmount Community Park, no updates there at this time. That work's still a couple of months away before it will progress. Reed's Pit, very similar, just the timeline there at the end of the report, and similarly for Hamilton Domain Pump Track and Overflow Car Park, just timing of when the next stages of that work will occur in August. Land acquisition upgrades, Mr. Maisie referred to progress being made by property staff from Bianca Weiss, taking our lead on that. So quite a bit of effort on that those projects. And they are challenging for landowners, and they are also challenging, I suppose, for the council to make sure the right outcomes are being achieved. But there's good process to follow here in terms of Public Works Act. It's not new ground that we're being asked to create. So the process there. Residential sections. The issue of Mill Pond Lane, and I've placed a couple of letters showing exchange between myself and the Lincoln Committee. This matter has been of interest to the committee for some time. The challenge here is, I suppose, and the council either by itself or the property committee in the last 2 to 3 years has looked at this matter, but it's probably fair to say that you can understand the passion of the committee to want to hold this site, which has been open space for a significant period of time, but it can be, and the council is proceeding down the lines of putting in place a residential subdivision. It's protected public interest by creating the link and the walkway through Moffat Drive. It's created the bridge. It's created a number of matters which actually give that wonderful feel to the Liffey as you go mainly from one side of the township right through to the other side now with the opening of the walkway past the new primary school. So arguably there is more than enough space. There's more than enough space around the Liffey being provided. But there is a view, as you've seen in the letter attached from the committee. I suppose that I'll just pause here in case there is maybe a differing view from the council as to where previous councils have come and where staff are giving advice, just to make sure we are on the same page.
I'm the local council, and I need to reflect the community view, and they are quite strong in perceiving that this area is particularly valuable to them. They perceive that there's a really valuable part of the community which would utilise it, and they are really concerned about the opportunity cost, I suppose, of losing this land in perpetuity. So they have been certainly been really engaged in trying to lobby the council staff and councillors, I guess, to understand what is happening here. And I suppose what Mr. Marshall's talking about is that the council did buy this as an investment. So there's $1 million of ratepayer money outstanding on this, which is hopefully we're recuperating through an operating lease at the moment, which we have with the business unit. But certainly my community is saying, can we, if not retain all of it, at least retain a larger part for the future?
Yes, I echo what Councillor Willis just said. I have been lobbied on many occasions over the last 6 or 7 years by members of this community who see this old country club site as a piece of Lincoln's history, and they see it as a wonderful reserve. You've got to remember that the country club was set up by the local farming community and the local community as a place to go some 30 years ago. It was built as a collaboration and secured a wonderful position on Mill Pond. The community has a lot of ownership of that space, and they would like to continue to have some ownership of that space. So they have talked over the years of wanting the building to be an art gallery and wanting the building to be a multitude of different things, which various members of the community committee have rung me and spoken to me about over the years. We have to remember that Lincoln Township has a growth ceiling of 14,500 people underneath the structure plan that it has. So at the rate it's growing fast at the moment, in the next 10 to 15 years, there'll be 14 or 15,000 people in that community. The opportunity is lost when it's swallowed up in a house.
Yeah.
And so I very much agree with the community here, and I would like to see their suggestion hold that, yes, sell off the balance, but keep the other 2 lots. We'll never get there again. This is a piece of Lincoln's history which has had a mill on it, and then it's had the community club, which is a more modern history, but it is a piece of history. This community will continue to grow. There'll continue to be reserve development contributions come into the pot, which may well have to be used in the long term to fund the deficit on the land that the council has bought. But I would very much like to see their suggestion put forward and held that those lots be held back from the other lots So we can keep this little piece. And I encourage you when you're in Lincoln to go and have a wander through. The walkway, I agree, Douglas, is fantastic. The bridge is fantastic. It is a lovely little corner of Lincoln. And once it's developed, it's gone forever.
I'd just like to echo the other two speakers with regards to supporting this, especially lot 7, somehow retain in council ownership. The Liffey and the development around the Liffey Reserve, as Douglas Wells knows, over a period of years has been really, really controversial. And many people don't want to be shortchanged over what can possibly be an idyllic spot overlooking a waterway with lots of rushes, and it's a gem. It's actually a gem for Lincoln and an asset for Selwyn across our district with regards to its location, and the importance of the L1 waterway that goes through there. And I think when we look at our biodiversity strategy, it's better to actually have it as a reserve area, open space, incorporating that waterway, than just having hard surfacing and somebody buying it and enjoying it at the exclusion of everybody else enjoying it. So councillors, please listen to this community committee and what they want. I just cannot emphasise that we're for the future, and we've got to look at biodiversity. And I agree, look, the development contributions coming in will actually cover this particular area. So please listen.
Congratulations to the Lincoln Community Committee. You've successfully railroaded your ward councillors. Well done. However, putting a district-wide hat on, this land was purchased with district-wide funds. It was never intended for a reserve. Council has affirmed that decision many times. I don't buy the biodiversity argument, Deborah. We're not planning to turn the Liffey at that point into a concrete channel. The Liffey will not, the biodiversity will not be adversely affected if this gets subdivided into houses. This was bought with district-wide funds. We need a return on those district-wide funds. There is, as the report here and other reports we've had, the development of walkways along the Liffey have been extensive. There is plenty of opportunities for community use and enjoyment of the Liffey, much more than other communities have in similar spaces. I'm not happy to be railroaded by a community committee with very narrow self-interest. If any, I would accept us asking for a further staff report about the provision of reserves in the Lincoln area. As with respect to the discussion around reserve development contributions, we've got a significant reserve on Birches Road that we're developing on behalf of the Prebbleton and Lincoln and Selwyn community, which I expect to take a fair chunk of development contributions. I'm not in favour of being railroaded by a community committee with narrow self-interest. We are elected to be district, not ward councillors.
Yeah, with the greatest respect to Mark, and it's almost embarrassing for me to have to say this, but as you know, in the last our last term, I had a lot more to do with art, history, and culture. It was a portfolio that I was given, and I don't think so much this term that it's quite such a priority. But I must say that the entire district that I represented with that portfolio were very keen on seeing that that would be retained and our ownership for the people of Selwyn. So I don't think, from my point of view, that it is just the people of Lincoln that want this building or this area retained. It's such a beautiful spot. It has got the history, and I think I certainly could put names to quite a few people who have actually said, never let that go. It's just too much history, too beautiful a spot. There's so many options. So from a district point of view, my point of view, I think we should look at some way of retaining it for our people.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Look, I'm not going to cast a value judgment about whether it's it's got value to be retained, not retained. It is the job of local ward councillors to represent the views of their community. So that's fine. I note that some didn't give an opinion about whether it should be retained or not, just they've represented the views of their community. What it brings into stark reality for me is that we have yet to have a real discussion about our investment portfolio and where it lies and where the benefits of those sales go. And I think until we've done that, we can't really have an in-depth discussion about retaining or not retaining some of these and the cost implications it has on the wider district as well. So once we land on that, then we can discuss individual parcels of land and where they fit in to our investment strategy. If it was indeed bought, as it appears to have been prior to my time, that it was bought as an investment, then it clearly was an investment. If the nature of that changes over time because we've had a change in view as council and as a community, then we need to understand what those cost implications are to our investment strategy. And that's where we have those discussions first and foremost.
I was just going to say, Murray's got a good point there, and so has everybody else. But as far as the whole idea of it's been bought as an investment and the idea was always to build houses on it, I don't know. But in terms of the district-wide discussion, we have very few townships that actually have a beautiful river flowing through the middle of them. Rolleston certainly doesn't. The best we've got is the Stonebrook Stream, which is lovely, but definitely not along the same lines as the Liffey. And it would be a shame to see, if you give me a choice of a reserve along somewhere that's an obvious environmental benefit against another house, I'll pick the reserve. And that isn't just because, I don't live in Lincoln. I'll quite happily take it for the amenity value. It's not all value, investment value is in selling a parcel off.
You just become an honorary Lincoln resident.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to echo those comments that are made, particularly with Sophie and Murray. I think it needs to have a better lens looked at it, looking at those things. I mean, once we sell it, it's gone. And there is obviously some views around this table that we should have a look at it, and I would support that. I mean, I think I've been out there, when the staff were out there, and it is a lovely spot. And it would be horrible if we hadn't actually had a good look at it on the people that are sitting at this table now and make a decision that way.
Far more support for not selling than selling, but there's a few things that we need to understand before a future decision's made, and by not selling, that keeps our options open as opposed to selling, which then closes down what those future discussions might look like. So just wondering your advice on how we might progress this, because the discussion so far, community committee's sort of asking for 6 and 7 rather than 1 through 5, but actually the discussion here probably needs to include 1 through 7 as a part of the discussion, rather than selling those first 5 and then wondering in 3 or 4 months' time why we did that, if we were going to keep 6 and 7. So the value of the reserve might actually be far greater to us if it was all of that area. Is there a way forward that's going to be able to provide you some clarity with the staff to progress this?
So I think the key point to note is that the area 1 through to 6 has been zoned residential for many years, or living for many years. It's not as if the council's rolled up and done the subdivision plan. So to some degree, that community, and I know that's probably a little bit tough, but it's considered as being residential space. What the Lincoln Community Committee is saying is that 1 through to 5, we can understand that needing to go. What they're saying, of course, and you've picked up on this, is we need to hold 7 in case, and 6 in case 7 remains as a building. What they are saying is a bare minimum, and if you can give us some understanding that if 7 is no longer used as a building, that you'll retain that as a reserved space, that would probably be amenable to us. But hey, give us some options with holding 6. Now, if you're looking for a reserve space, 7 would be very sensible, probably long term. Yes. At the moment, we've got a good use for it. Having 8 as a reserve gives all that protection. If you were thinking what that council might consider in, say, at the end of this lease period, it's a bit hard to guess that, but standing here, they'd probably look at it and come to a conclusion that maybe it is better as a reserve. I don't think the community is saying you need to hold back on the entire site. They're just saying, give us some options around 6 in particular. I mean, sitting here today, 6 is a nice site. Whether it's the best site for reserve, I mean, I've looked at Mark Rikers, who's got a lot of experience in this area. I would say 7 is the best reserve. 6 is near the Liffey, but that's all it is. If the council was long-term going to give some direction, then it would probably say we will hold 7 in perpetuity. If nothing, at least the minutes recognise that we haven't appointed agents yet, so there's still a bit of time to think a bit more about the 6 and 7, but really we should be maximising the best value out of our land wherever possible, and here certainly 1 to 5, I would suggest 1 to 6 should be going into residential subdivision. What's proposing 7, you can put some controls around that. Chief Executive referred to strategic assets. If you want to put some protection around, you would probably pass with this lot up into that list if that's what you wanted to do long term.
Councillor Lyle and then Lemon and Alexander.
Yeah, I concur with Douglas. I think the community committee have spoken, and I think 1 to 5 should be marketed. And I think if we can hold back on 6 and 7, just to see how things roll, that would give us the opportunity to plan to the future, look at opportunities for any shortfalls in the initial cost of the land. And I think that would be a very pragmatic way of going about it, and it's a bob each way.
Lemon?
Yeah, just for clarification, Sam, I haven't actually expressed an opinion about whether we should sell it or retain it. What I've said is we need to not do these things in isolation, and I think that's what we're in danger of doing. We need to ensure an understanding of the reason we bought this, where the proceeds are going to go, and where that fits into our strategy. And if that changes because we have a desire to create something else as well, we need to understand the cost implications for that for the whole district as well. So I'm not actually an advocate either way of selling or retaining. I'm saying let's not put the cart before the horse. We've yet to have those discussions around an investment strategy, and the CE is bringing that to us in the very near future, September, and we will have the opportunity then to perhaps have these discussions further. I just think we're in danger of making up decisions on the fly, and we're not going to have a good outcome.
No, but I hear you, Murray, but that is a decision to not sell at the moment. So it's a decision one way, even if it is only for the short term. Councillor Alexander?
I'd be happy to have this, to have these further reporting, because I suspect we've invested in the infrastructure to service sections 1 to 6, and that if any are held over, we've wasted putting the water, sewage, and other infrastructure into the ground for them. But also I would remind councillors the difficulty we had in this year's annual plan of holding our rates down. And here we have 6 sections of prime value, and when we're looking at our long-term plan and we're saying we want to minimise rates increases over the next 10 years, to not utilise the opportunity of these 6 sections means a rate increase. If that's what we're happy with, then that's what we're happy with. I would be personally happy to say we will sell 1 to 6 and say that we will retain 7 for community purposes in perpetuity, whether it's a building that's leased and then turned into a community building, or a building that's demolished at the end of those leases and turned into a reserve. That would, I could agree with that, but retaining these sections were developed, we bought and developed them for sale to make a return on this investment for this area, would show a lack of prudence. We need to realise the yield from this to offset against future rates. That's why the district bought them. It wasn't the Lincoln community that bought them, it was the district.
So Douglas, it doesn't sound like there's any argument between selling 1 through 5 and with 6 and 7 to be held over for future discussion. Sorry, Bob, didn't see that.
I agree with that. I just feel that we should be looking further afield. There's rumours of reserves over in our areas being sold, which is getting around the community. And I think that's another thing that we should bring into this, and not just be looking at one, but we should be looking at all our reserves and where we're going with them in the future, so the community know what's happening.
Douglas, does that give you direction at the moment with where we sit on this And you need a resolution.
Yes, that's given direction. I think a couple of things we can do. We can report back on a useful metric, which is the amount of open space that each community has. And Lincoln is at the moment very well provided. That aside, this is a unique site. There's no physical infrastructure going on the ground. That's just currently being scheduled at the moment. The resource consent is, we've had a draft consent condition come back, and we're just working through some of the conditions for us. So there is timing's coming up, but we can report back on a couple of matters for you. I think the key point would be, as Councillor Reid said, if you get the chance to go and visit the site over the next few weeks, do it. It's got Dairy NZ are on site now, but you're able to wander through the site, so there's no restriction on that. Cross the bridge, walk down. I think what's important is also not just to stand on this site and take it in, because it is a truly good site, but also walk the Liffey a wee bit, just so you can get a feel, because that gives you an understanding of what the Liffey experience is, as opposed to just standing on this one particular site. So a useful discussion.
I just wonder whether we get some words in the minutes, just so that it's confirmed what the discussion has landed on today, that would say we confirm the development, marketing and sale process for numbers 1 through 5, but that 6 and 7 be subject to a future report to council. I'll give you those words if you need them, Naomi. But that's for councillors. You're comfortable with that wording?
So moved.
Okay. Moved Lyle, seconded Hassan. Anything else in your report, Douglas, that you want to touch on?
Sorry, this is a new report's been put together by staff, which is just where our relicensing process is at. That's just for information. I think the key point I'd highlight in the future workflow is, you can see sort of roughly, ignoring the sale and huts licenses, we've just got a wee bit of a peak in that 2024 year. We just ultimately need to try and knock it off a bit and flatten it out, so that we sort of have about every year somewhere in the region of 25 to 30 licenses that we're renewing in any one period. Just makes life a bit easier for staff. So that's a useful bit of information for you there, hopefully. And the final comment is on solar panels.
Can I just start a question on licensing, Douglas? When that specifically referred to gravel reserves relicensing, there are other leases that groups are waiting to have their leases renewed. They're quite willing and happy for it, but there seems to be some delay prior and post-COVID lockdowns in getting these processed. I've sent you an email this afternoon on that one.
Oh, great. That's good to give me the specifics. I'll look at that one in particular. Thank you. And finally, the last one is there on indoor court and solar panels. So just provided sort of some summary and key points out of the reports, and really, I suppose, just coming to the conclusion that this is becoming more of an investment decision as to whether we should proceed any further. It's one of those interesting ones that if you sort of look and say, well, if we had gone through all this process prior to actually starting the build, would we have a different decision? And I think I've looked at this a couple of times, and I've concluded, if you were having to strengthen the building and spend monies, then it does just become a straight out investment decision. And I probably was concluding in my mind, particularly because we can't use the power directly across the road in the Selwyn Aquatic Centre, that on an investment basis, straight out dollars, no, it wouldn't stack up. You wouldn't have spent the extra strengthening. Yes, you get the benefit of getting the solar, as we're doing anyway in this project, for the building itself, but in terms of an overall investment side. And I think where I'm probably concluding, and I think we referred to this in our previous workshops, is that if we were going to get into solar, we probably should widen our thinking. As you know, a lot of solar sits on the ground, and that's the type of thing if you really think, and I'm now looking at my friend the CEO and thinking, if solar is an investment decision, and his investment policy is an excellent place for solar to sit, that's just purely saying it's an investment issue. If getting into solar has sustainability and environmental issues, that's a different discussion. And that's probably where John and I have been concluding as we've got to this. It's been there is cost to this exercise. It's been worth doing, but I think it's a very separate piece of work if we're going to advance on solar and where we go long term that's where we see it. So I think I'll make one more comment, and this is only just an observation. We all know that there's a certain power station potentially going to have a lot of spare capacity in New Zealand coming up. What we don't know is what that will do to power prices. And so one of the challenges, I mean, again, this is very simplistic, is that what the spot price and all that type of thing at the moment of energy is may change quite dramatically going forward. But then again, you know, we just don't know what the answer is to that. So right now, I think if you were looking at this, thinking this is an option, you would sit back a bit and just see where the market goes.
Thank you. Jenny and then Murray.
Thank you. Douglas, I've got a question for you, just going back to Horata. You said that there was going to be a public meeting next week. I have heard from various members of the community that the meetings that they have had in Horata, a lot of the community are not allowed to go and speak to. So has this public meeting as such been advertised so that people can have their say?
I understand. I've got an individual coming to see me tomorrow to talk about, you know, what council might say at that meeting. So I'm assuming that I've seen proofs of advertisements and they've gone into the local papers. So the local paper might be able to tell you whether they've got an ad for the meeting. I don't know for sure.
No, Murray.
Yeah, Douglas, I guess with the solar panels thing, to take on board what you're saying, I guess it could be part of a wider discussion on investment. And that's possibly quite correct. But we don't necessarily, under the models, and we've talked about this before, we don't necessarily have to own the infrastructure. There are other models to explore as well. So I guess you've called my bluff a wee bit since I talked about investment strategy in the previous topic. So I'll shut up, and obviously Councillor Miller's going to have something to say anyway.
Councillor Miller.
Well, two things. First was just to back about Coast Water Freedom Camping. I drove the other day and there was some water line there. Just given how fast that situation changes around water rising there, are we okay with our ability to respond fast enough to get people out of there in the event of a storm event? That's the first question.
So we have we get telemetry alerting out of the Southern River from Environment Canterbury. So in this room, Murray Washington and I get that, as well as a number of council rangers, as well as roading contractors. So no, more than comfortable. But I will cautionary that last flood we got through the Selwyn 2 years ago did happen in a hell of a rush at the end. And local knowledge, as well as I suppose our in-house knowledge, was that the groundwater was really high that year and there was nowhere for the river to go. And it just came rocketing down and really quick. I mean, we managed it fine, but I think that was a good lesson to learn. So no, I'm comfortable. We've got all that expertise we need to be able to shut the gates. And because remember, it's coming from 12 hours away, although as I say, the last bit happened in a hell of a rush last time.
The question was really around, should we have an alternative winter freedom camping spot, whether it be down here?
Yeah, so we do. So at the moment, Coes and Chamberlains are, I think we would have Coes.
I mean, away from the river completely, like in Rolls.
Oh, Lakeside. We use Lakeside. And that's Lakeside, if that ever is ever going to be flooded, that happens on a hell of a lot slower basis for the obvious reason. So no, Lakeside's more than adequate what we need.
Murray was right, I did want to talk on solar. I guess normally I'm always about the dollars and cents, but particularly we've had Andrew talk about our carbon footprint, how we might mitigate that and what our strategy is around that. And we have a very solid partner in Orion who increasingly is interested in this sphere. I just wouldn't like the opportunity to pass without at least contacting our director and asking are they interested in being collaborative on that issue, because of that before. My understanding is that they were interested in having some exemplars out in the community, much like the electric charging stations, of what can be achieved, particularly in Ralston when there's a large-scale industrial estates being built. What are the options if you are a warehouse owner to perhaps subsidise your energy costs or export power out of your build? So it's not all about dollars and cents, it's about perhaps an exemplar, and it may not be the indoor stadium as you suggest. It may be somewhere else within iZone or iPort that we get some collaboration on, but it's more about looking at the big picture. As an aside, I was concerned that perhaps it might need strengthening, because I would have thought, given the weight of solar powers, it would be well within the snow loading.
Yeah, one little flaw with that argument, of course, is if you get snow and solar panels at the same time, the roof possibly won't survive. it's only a small possibility of that happening, but it's not what I'd be recommending. No, your reason is quite sound.
Don't turn up here with logic.
Councillor Rees.
Grant's kind of stolen my thunder. But it is carbon footprint. We do need to be looking at that, and these solar panels. But we have other buildings that potentially could be looked at if we're actually looking at. But there's also other sorts of renewables like wind. But it's a good point, Douglas, you raised about where the spot price would go. But it's definitely things that we need to look at wider and with our investment strategy. But it is just good sense now for looking at these sorts of things going forward, looking at our carbon footprint, to be looking wider than just what we're normally doing in standard builds and things like that.
Thanks, Nicole, for that. Alexander?
Thank you. 2 comments. If we're looking for a place that we could look at including solar in the design, Ralston Town Centre, a retail area that's going to be going pretty much during the daytime, it would seem to lend itself to solar reducing its footprint. It's at a design stage, so it may be useful asking the question as to whether it's economic to include it in designs. The second of which is we've got to be careful not to sit in greenwash. The whole life cycle of these solar fittings needs to be considered, that we're not just putting it up, it looks good, but when you look at the whole life cycle, it wasn't as good as it looked. So, and particularly as your comments with respect to should the aluminium smelter in Invercargill go away, we're going to have a surplus of renewable electricity in the South Island, which makes solar much harder to actually justify because we're replacing renewable energy with renewable energy at a higher cost.
The report's been moved by Lyle. Addition that the council confirms that the development of Mill Pond sections 1 through 5 be developed, marketed and sold, and that 2 Mill Pond sections 6 and 7 be subject to a future report. All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. And the last item on the public agenda is the registration of documents signed and sealed. Councillor Lemon has a conflict with item number 3. He's a member of the Ellesmere Lions and will not take part in this decision. It's a mover and seconder, Alexander and Reid. Any discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Declare it carried. That moves us through to the end of the open part of our meeting. Thanks for joining us if you've been online or in the room with us. The resolution to exclude the public, Epaha and Bland. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Declare it carried. And we'll break for afternoon tea. And I think we'll probably